Hello everyone. Welcome to Mr. Midnight True Crime Stories. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. There is something about a quiet town that makes people believe they are safe. The kind of place where neighbors wave from porches, where the local diner knows your usual order, where children ride bikes until the streetlights flicker on. These are the places we return to in our minds when the world feels too loud, too dangerous, too unpredictable. We tell ourselves that violence happens elsewhere, to other people, in cities we have never visited. We believe that the people we know, the ones we see at the grocery store and the post office and church on Sunday mornings, are fundamentally good. We trust them because we have no reason not to. And that trust, that beautiful, fragile thing we build over years of small kindnesses and shared moments, can become the very thing that destroys us. This is a story about 5 murders, 5 betrayals, 5 moments when ordinary life shattered into something unrecognizable. These cases are not connected by geography or time or method. They are connected by something far more unsettling. They are connected by intimacy, by familiarity, by the terrible truth that the most dangerous person in your life might be someone you love, someone you trust, someone you would never, in 1,000 quiet mornings, suspect of violence. These stories do not feature masked strangers or random attacks in dark alleys. They feature mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, friends and neighbors. They feature people who smiled in family photographs and attended community events and seemed, by every visible measure, normal. The violence in these stories did not announce itself. It grew slowly, quietly, in the spaces between ordinary days. It festered in unspoken resentments, in addictions hidden behind closed doors, in relationships that looked stable from the outside but were rotting from within. And when it finally erupted, it left behind not just bodies but questions that have no comfortable answers. How well do we really know the people closest to us? What are we missing when we choose to see only the best in someone? And what does it say about us, about all of us, that these stories keep happening? Before we begin, understand this. These cases are real. The names have been changed, certain details altered to protect the privacy of survivors and families, but the essence of what happened remains unchanged. The grief is real. The loss is real. The warning, if there is one to be found in these dark hours, is real. So settle in, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself for a long journey into the places we would rather not look. The first story begins in a town called Harbor Point, a place where the smell of salt water mixed with diesel fuel, where fishing boats returned each evening with their catches, where men gathered in a bar that had stood on the same corner for 40 years. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where reputations were built slowly and could be destroyed in an instant. And at the center of this community was a man named Daniel Mercer. Daniel was not a complicated man. He had inherited the bar from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him. The Mercer family had roots in Harbor Point that went back generations, and Daniel carried that legacy with a quiet pride. He opened the bar at 10 each morning and closed it sometime after midnight, 6 days a week, 50 weeks a year. He knew his customers by name, knew their families, knew their struggles. When someone lost a job, Daniel would quietly slide a 20 across the bar and tell them not to worry about their tab. When a local kid needed work, Daniel found a spot for them washing glasses or sweeping floors. He was not a wealthy man, but he was generous in the way that people who have very little often are. He understood that money was just paper, but kindness could change a life. His bar was called simply Mercer's, and it was more than a place to drink. It was a gathering spot, a confessional, a second home for men who had nowhere else to go. The walls were covered in photographs of fishing trips and softball teams, of weddings and christenings, of moments that mattered to people who lived quiet lives. There was a jukebox in the corner that still played actual records, and on Friday nights, someone would always feed it quarters until the room filled with the kind of music that made older men nostalgic and younger ones curious. Daniel moved through it all with an easy grace, refilling glasses, telling jokes, listening to problems he could not solve but could at least acknowledge. People loved him. That is not an exaggeration. In a town of 8,000 people, Daniel Mercer was genuinely beloved. He had coached Little League for years, had served on the volunteer fire department, had organized fundraisers for families facing medical bills they could never pay. He was the kind of man who made a place feel safer just by existing in it. And when people talked about him, which they often did, they used words like solid and dependable and good. He was 43 years old, built like someone who had worked with his hands his entire life, with a face that creased easily into a smile. He was, by every measure anyone cared to use, one of the good ones. But behind the bar, behind the smiles and the easy laughter, Daniel's life was fracturing. His wife, Elena, was struggling. She had always been fragile, or at least that is how people who knew her described it. Fragile, delicate, sensitive. She had grown up in Harbor Point, had married Daniel when they were both 22, and for a while, it seemed like a good match. But over the years, something shifted. She became withdrawn, moody, prone to disappearing for hours without explanation. Daniel made excuses for her, the way people do when they love someone who is slipping away. He told friends she was tired, that she was dealing with some health issues, that she just needed time. He did not tell them about the pills. He did not tell them about the money that kept going missing from the register. He did not tell them about the nights she came home so late that morning was already breaking over the harbor. Elena was addicted to painkillers. It had started years earlier, after a car accident left her with chronic back pain. The prescription was supposed to be temporary, but temporary became permanent, and permanent became something far darker. She moved from pills prescribed by a doctor to pills bought from friends to pills bought from people she would never have spoken to in another life. The addiction hollowed her out, turned her into someone Daniel barely recognized. And with the addiction came debt. Terrible, crushing debt that grew faster than Daniel could manage. He worked longer hours, cut his own pay, borrowed from friends, but it was never enough. The hole kept getting deeper. And then there was Elena's brother, Victor. Victor Hale was 10 years older than his sister, and he had spent most of those years drifting through bad decisions and worse company. He had a record, petty theft mostly, some drug charges, nothing violent, but enough to mark him as someone to avoid. Daniel had never liked Victor, but family was family, and when Elena begged him to give her brother a job at the bar, Daniel agreed. It was a mistake. Victor was unreliable, showing up late or not at all, pocketing cash when he thought no one was looking. But firing him would have meant a fight with Elena, and Daniel was already fighting enough battles. So he let it slide, the way he let so many things slide, hoping that kindness and patience would eventually win out. They did not. One cold night in October, Daniel closed the bar just after midnight. It had been a slow evening, just a handful of regulars nursing beers and watching a baseball game on the television mounted above the liquor shelf. He locked the front door, counted the register, and walked out into the parking lot behind the building. The air smelled like rain, and the wind coming off the water carried a chill that made him pull his jacket tighter. He was thinking about Elena, about whether she would be home when he got there, about whether they could find a way back to the people they used to be. He was thinking about everything except the possibility that someone was waiting for him in the shadows. The first shot hit him in the chest. He stumbled, more from surprise than pain, and tried to understand what was happening. The second shot hit him in the side, and he fell, the asphalt cold and rough against his face. He could hear footsteps, could hear voices, but they sounded far away, like he was underwater. He tried to speak, tried to ask why, but no words came. And then there was a third shot, and after that, there was nothing at all. Daniel Mercer died in the parking lot of the bar his grandfather had built, surrounded by the smell of salt water and engine oil, alone in the dark. The call came in at 12:47 in the morning. A driver passing by had seen a man lying in the parking lot and phoned the police. By the time the first officers arrived, Daniel had been dead for at least 20 minutes, maybe longer. There was no wallet on his body, no obvious signs of a struggle, nothing to suggest he had fought back. The register inside the bar was empty, but that was normal for closing time. Daniel always took the cash home with him, a habit his father had instilled in him decades earlier. So this was not a robbery, or at least not a successful one. This was something else. The investigation moved quickly. In a town like Harbor Point, where violent crime was rare enough to be shocking, the police department threw everything they had at the case. They interviewed employees, regular customers, anyone who had been at the bar that night. They pulled security footage from nearby businesses, though most of the cameras were old and the quality was poor. They searched Daniel's home, his truck, his office in the back of the bar. And slowly, painfully, a picture began to emerge. It was not the picture anyone wanted to see. Elena's behavior after the murder was strange. Not hysterical, not grief-stricken, just strange. She seemed distant, almost detached, answering questions in a flat monotone that made the detectives exchange glances. When they asked where she had been that night, she said she had been home, alone, watching television. When they asked if she could prove it, she shrugged and said no. When they asked if Daniel had any enemies, she laughed, a short, bitter sound that did not match the question. She said everyone loved Daniel. Everyone except her. The phone records told a different story. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Elena had been in constant contact with her brother Victor. Hundreds of text messages, dozens of calls, many of them late at night when Daniel would have been working. The content of those messages was damning. They talked about money, about how much the bar was worth, about life insurance policies. They talked about Daniel like he was an obstacle, a problem to be solved. And in one message, sent 3 days before the murder, Elena had written something that made the detective's blood run cold. She wrote, "He won't just give us the money. We have to take it." Victor was arrested first. He had an alibi, or at least he claimed to. He said he had been at a friend's house that night, playing cards, drinking beer, minding his own business. But the friend, when questioned, could not quite remember if Victor had been there the whole night or if he had left for a while. And when the police searched Victor's apartment, they found a 9mm handgun hidden in a closet, wrapped in a towel. Ballistics matched it to the bullets pulled from Daniel's body. But Victor did not act alone. 2 other men were involved, both of them in their late teens, both of them drifting through life with no direction and no prospects. They had met Victor through the kind of connections that form in the shadow economy of small towns. People who knew people who knew people. Victor had promised them money, had told them it would be easy, that all they had to do was be there and make sure Daniel did not walk away. They believed him because they were young and desperate and stupid. And now they were facing murder charges. Elena was the last to be arrested. She tried to run, or at least that is how it looked. 2 days after Victor was taken into custody, she packed a bag and drove south, heading toward the state line. The police found her at a rest stop 100 miles from Harbor Point, sitting in her car with the engine running, staring at nothing. When they asked her why she was running, she said she was not running, she was just thinking. When they told her they knew what she had done, she started to cry. Not the loud, wrenching sobs of someone consumed by guilt, but quiet tears that seemed more about self-pity than remorse. The trial was brutal. The prosecution laid out a case so clear, so unambiguous, that the defense had almost nothing to work with. They showed the jury the text messages, the phone records, the financial documents that proved Elena and Victor had been planning this for months. They presented witnesses who testified that Elena had talked openly about how much easier her life would be if Daniel were gone. They brought in experts who explained the ballistics, the timeline, the evidence that placed Victor and his 2 accomplices at the scene. And through it all, Elena sat at the defense table looking small and pale and defeated. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been coerced, that Victor had manipulated her, that her addiction had clouded her judgment. It was not entirely untrue. Victor was older, more experienced in the machinery of crime, and he had used his sister's desperation against her. But the jury did not buy it. They saw a woman who had actively participated in the planning of her husband's murder, who had known exactly what was going to happen and had done nothing to stop it. They saw someone who had valued money more than the life of a man who had loved her, who had protected her, who had given her chance after chance to get better. And they found her guilty. Victor and the 2 younger men were also convicted. Victor received life without parole. The teenagers, because of their age and their willingness to testify against him, received lighter sentences, though they would still spend decades in prison. Elena was sentenced to life as well, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. She showed no emotion when the verdict was read, no reaction when the judge handed down the sentence. She simply stood, allowed herself to be led away, and disappeared into the system. Harbor Point struggled to make sense of what had happened. Daniel's funeral was standing room only, with people spilling out of the church and onto the sidewalk. They told stories about his kindness, his generosity, the way he had made the town feel like a family. They cried for him, and they cried for themselves, for the loss of someone who had anchored their community. The bar stayed closed for weeks, and when it finally reopened under new ownership, it was never quite the same. The photographs stayed on the walls, the jukebox still played the same records, but something essential was missing. The heart of the place had died with Daniel. People asked questions they could not answer. How had they missed the signs? Had there been moments when they could have intervened, could have helped Elena before her addiction consumed her, could have warned Daniel that his generosity was being weaponized against him? Or was this inevitable, the kind of tragedy that unfolds slowly, invisibly, until it is too late to stop? There were no good answers. Only the uncomfortable realization that the people we think we know are often strangers wearing familiar faces. Daniel Mercer had been a good man. That was the refrain repeated at his funeral, in the newspaper articles that covered the case, in the conversations that lingered for months afterward. A good man, a kind man, a man who deserved better than to die in a parking lot, murdered by people he had trusted. But goodness, the town learned, is not a shield. It does not protect you from the people who see your kindness as weakness, who interpret your love as something to exploit. Daniel had given everything to the people around him, and in the end, it had cost him his life. The second story takes place hundreds of miles away, in a city called Maple Grove. It was a different kind of place, larger, more suburban, the kind of community where families moved for good schools and safe streets. The houses had neat lawns and two-car garages, and the parks were filled with children on weekend mornings. It was a place where people went to church, where they volunteered at food banks and coached youth sports, where they believed in the inherent goodness of their neighbors. It was a place where a woman named Rachel Holloway was building a life that seemed, by every measure, blessed. Rachel was 28 years old, married to a man named Caleb, and 7 months pregnant with their second child. Their first, a little boy named Isaiah, had just turned 2, and Rachel spent her days chasing after him, reading him stories, teaching him the names of colors and animals. She was deeply involved in their church, a large, modern congregation that met in a building that looked more like a concert hall than a traditional sanctuary. She led Bible studies for young mothers, organized charity drives, visited elderly members of the congregation who could no longer leave their homes. She was the kind of person who radiated warmth, who made people feel seen and valued, who seemed genuinely happy in a way that was becoming increasingly rare. Caleb was a pastor, though not at their church. He traveled frequently, speaking at conferences and leading retreats, building a reputation as someone who could connect with younger audiences. He was charismatic, articulate, passionate about his faith in a way that drew people to him. He and Rachel were, by all appearances, a perfect match. They had met in college, had married young, and had built a life centered around their shared beliefs. They were the couple other couples wanted to be, the ones who made marriage look easy, who seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. They were happy, or at least, that is what everyone thought. On a Tuesday morning in November, Rachel woke early, as she always did. Caleb was out of town, speaking at a conference in another state, and she was alone with Isaiah. She made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and fed her son while he babbled about the cartoons he wanted to watch. She cleaned the kitchen, started a load of laundry, and settled Isaiah in front of the television with his favorite stuffed animal. It was a normal morning, the kind she had lived 1,000 times before. She had no reason to think it would be her last. 3 men were driving through Maple Grove that morning, high on methamphetamine and looking for houses to rob. They had been on a spree for days, breaking into homes while families were at work or school, stealing electronics and jewelry, and anything else they could sell quickly. They were sloppy, reckless, driven by a desperation that overrode any sense of caution. They had no plan, no system, just a vague understanding that they needed money and that other people had things worth taking. The first house they hit that morning was empty. They kicked in the back door, ransacked the bedrooms, and left with a laptop and some cash they found in a drawer. The second house was the same, quick and easy, no complications. But the third house, Rachel's house, was different. When they tried the back door, they found it unlocked. That should have been a warning, should have told them that someone was home, but they were too high to think clearly. They pushed the door open and stepped inside. Rachel heard them immediately. She was upstairs, folding laundry in the bedroom, and the sound of footsteps on the kitchen floor made her freeze. For a moment, she thought it might be Caleb, home early from his trip, but the footsteps were too heavy, too unfamiliar. She moved to the top of the stairs and looked down, and her heart stopped. There were 3 men in her house, strangers, their faces flushed and their movements jerky with chemical energy. One of them saw her and shouted something she could not understand. She ran, not out of the house, because Isaiah was downstairs, but into the bedroom where she grabbed her phone and locked the door. She dialed 911, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone, and whispered that there were intruders in her house, that she needed help, that her son was downstairs, and she did not know where they were. The operator told her to stay on the line, told her that officers were on the way, told her not to leave the room. But even as the operator spoke, Rachel could hear footsteps on the stairs, could hear the men arguing about what to do, could hear one of them trying the bedroom door. 2 of the men panicked. They grabbed what they could and ran, leaving through the same door they had entered. But the 3rd man, the one who had seen Rachel at the top of the stairs, stayed. He told the others to go, that he would catch up, and they did not question him. They were too scared, too focused on getting away. And so he was alone in the house with Rachel and her son, and what happened next would haunt everyone who heard about it for years. He broke down the bedroom door. It was not hard. The lock was flimsy, meant to provide privacy, not security. Rachel backed into the corner, holding her phone, begging him to leave, telling him he could take anything he wanted, just please do not hurt her, please do not hurt her baby. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes unfocused, his breathing heavy. And then he grabbed her. Rachel fought. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, terrified, but she fought with everything she had. She scratched at his face, tried to scream, tried to get to the door. She could hear Isaiah crying downstairs, could hear the television still playing cartoons, could hear the operator on the phone asking if she was okay. She was not okay. She would never be okay again. He assaulted her. The details are too brutal to recount fully, too graphic for words that will be heard in the quiet hours before sleep. But understand this. Rachel Holloway, a woman who had spent her life helping others, who had volunteered her time and her energy and her compassion, who was carrying a child she would never meet, was violated in the most horrific way imaginable. And when she continued to resist, when she refused to stop fighting, he shot her. 3 times. Once in the chest, once in the abdomen, and once in the head. She died in the bedroom she had shared with her husband, in the house where she had planned to raise her children, in a pool of blood that soaked into the carpet and would never fully come out. The police arrived 6 minutes after her initial call. They found the front door open, the house eerily quiet except for the sound of a toddler crying. Isaiah was in the living room, unharmed, clutching his stuffed animal and calling for his mother. The officers moved through the house with their weapons drawn, clearing each room, calling out for Rachel. They found her upstairs. One of the officers, a veteran with 15 years on the force, would later say it was the worst thing he had ever seen. He would take early retirement a year later, unable to shake the image of that room, that woman, that senseless waste. The investigation moved with brutal efficiency. The 2 men who had fled the house were picked up within hours, their faces scratched and bruised from their clumsy escape through a neighbor's yard. They talked immediately, eager to distance themselves from what had happened, eager to place the blame on the man who had stayed behind. They gave his name, described his appearance, told the detectives where he might be hiding. They provided details about the other houses they had robbed, the drugs they had taken, the chaotic spiral that had led them to Rachel's door. They were terrified, and rightly so. What had started as a series of burglaries had become a capital murder case. The man who killed Rachel was found 2 days later, hiding in an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. He did not resist arrest. He seemed almost relieved, as if some part of him had been waiting for this moment. His name was Marcus Wade, and he was 24 years old. He had a long criminal record, drug charges mostly, some assault, nothing that predicted the level of violence he was capable of. When the detectives interviewed him, he admitted to being in the house. He admitted to going upstairs. But he claimed he did not remember what happened after that, that the drugs had made everything hazy, that he was not the kind of person who would hurt anyone. The physical evidence told a different story. DNA found on Rachel's body matched Marcus Wade. His fingerprints were on the gun used to kill her, a weapon he had stolen from a previous burglary. Security footage from an ATM 2 blocks away showed him withdrawing money using a credit card he had taken from Rachel's purse. And when they searched the abandoned building where he was hiding, they found Rachel's wedding ring in his pocket, a small gold band that Caleb had placed on her finger 6 years earlier. The trial was one of the most emotionally charged in the city's history. The courtroom was packed every day, filled with members of Rachel's church, friends and family, people who had never met her but felt compelled to bear witness. Caleb sat in the front row, his face a mask of grief and rage, holding Isaiah on his lap. The little boy was too young to understand what was happening, too young to know that his mother was gone, but he seemed to sense his father's pain. He was unusually quiet, clutching the same stuffed animal he had been holding the day his mother died. The prosecution presented a case that was overwhelming in its clarity. They showed the jury photographs of the crime scene, played the recording of Rachel's 911 call, brought in forensic experts who explained the timeline of events. They presented the testimony of the two men who had fled the house, who described Marcus Wade's state of mind, his increasingly erratic behavior, his insistence on staying behind. And they brought in Rachel's friends and family, who spoke about the woman she had been, the life she had lived, the future that had been stolen from her. The defense had nothing. They tried to argue that Marcus had been too impaired to form intent, that the drugs had removed his ability to make rational decisions. They brought in experts who testified about the effects of methamphetamine, about how it could induce psychosis, about how it could make someone capable of acts they would never commit while sober. But the jury did not care. They saw a man who had entered a home uninvited, who had assaulted a pregnant woman, who had murdered her when she resisted. They saw a monster, and they convicted him on all counts. The sentencing phase was where the case took a turn that divided public opinion. The prosecution sought the death penalty, arguing that the crime was so heinous, so brutal, that nothing less would serve justice. But before the jury could deliberate, Caleb Holloway asked to address the court. He stood, his voice steady despite the tears running down his face, and he said something that shocked everyone in the room. He said he forgave Marcus Wade. He said that Rachel would have wanted mercy, not vengeance, and that as a man of faith, he could not ask for someone's death, even the death of the man who had taken everything from him. The courtroom fell silent. Some people wept openly, moved by Caleb's words. Others looked angry, betrayed, as if his forgiveness somehow diminished the horror of what had been done. The judge allowed Caleb to continue, and he spoke for nearly 20 minutes, talking about Rachel's faith, her belief in redemption, her conviction that every person was worthy of grace. He spoke about his son, about how he did not want Isaiah to grow up with hatred in his heart, about how the cycle of violence had to end somewhere. And he spoke about the child Rachel had been carrying, a daughter they were going to name Grace, who would never take a breath, never open her eyes, never know the love her parents had waiting for her. When Caleb finished, there was not a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the detectives who had worked the case, men and women who had seen the worst humanity had to offer, were visibly affected. The defense attorney stood and thanked Caleb, his voice thick with emotion. The prosecutor looked uncomfortable, torn between his duty to seek the harshest penalty and his respect for a man who had lost everything yet still chose compassion. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they sentenced Marcus Wade to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was not the death penalty, but it was as close as they could get while still honoring Caleb's plea for mercy. Marcus showed no emotion when the sentence was read. He simply nodded, as if he had expected nothing less, and allowed himself to be led away. Caleb Holloway's act of forgiveness became a national story. He was interviewed on news programs, invited to speak at conferences, held up as an example of faith in action. Some people praised him, calling him a modern-day saint, a man who had transcended his own pain to embody the principles he preached. Others criticized him, arguing that forgiveness in the face of such evil was not noble but naive, that it sent a message that some crimes were forgivable when they should never be. The debate raged for months, in newspapers and online forums and church basements, and there were no easy answers. But Caleb did not seem interested in the debate. He withdrew from public life, focused on raising his son, on preserving Rachel's memory in the way she would have wanted. He established a foundation in her name, dedicated to helping victims of violent crime and their families. He continued to speak occasionally, but only when he felt it would serve Rachel's legacy, only when he thought it might bring some measure of good out of the darkness. He never remarried. He never stopped wearing his wedding ring. and he never stopped missing the woman who had been taken from him on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The third story moves to a place called Redfield Plains, a farming community where the land stretched flat and endless under a sky that seemed too big for comfort. It was a place where families had lived for generations, where the same names appeared on mailboxes and in the cemetery, where everyone knew everyone's business and privacy was more an idea than a reality. Life here moved slowly, dictated by the rhythms of planting and harvest, of livestock and weather, of traditions that had remained unchanged for decades. Nathan Cole was a farmer, as his father had been and his father before him. He owned 200 acres of corn and soybeans, land that had been in his family since the 1800s. He worked hard, the kind of hard that left his hands permanently stained and his back aching by the time he was 40. He had 4 children, ranging in age from 6 to 14, and a wife named Mara who managed the household with the same efficiency she brought to everything else in her life. From the outside, the Coles looked like the picture of rural stability. They attended church every Sunday, participated in community events, hosted family gatherings that filled their farmhouse with laughter and the smell of home-cooked food. They were respected, liked, integrated into the fabric of a community that valued consistency above all else. But inside the Cole house, things were not as they appeared. Mara was unhappy. She had been unhappy for years, though she was skilled at hiding it, at presenting the face everyone expected to see. She had married Nathan when she was 21, fresh out of a 2-year college program, eager to escape the small town where she had grown up. But marrying Nathan had not been an escape. It had been a different kind of trap. She loved her children, or at least she told herself she did, but motherhood had not brought her the fulfillment she had been promised. And Nathan, steady, dependable Nathan, bored her. He was a good man, a good father, a good provider. But good was not enough. She wanted more, though she could not have articulated what more meant. Mara worked part-time at a hair salon in the nearest town, a 30-minute drive from the farm. It was her escape, the place where she could talk to people who did not know everything about her, where she could pretend, for a few hours, to be someone other than Nathan Cole's wife. And it was at the salon that she met Evan Brooks. Evan was not from Redfield Plains. He had moved to the area a year earlier, looking for work, and had taken a job at a construction company. He was younger than Mara by 5 years, good-looking in a rough, unpolished way, and he paid attention to her in a way Nathan had stopped doing years ago. It started innocently enough. Evan came in for a haircut, and Mara made small talk the way she did with all her clients. But something clicked between them, some unspoken recognition of mutual loneliness. He started coming in more frequently, always requesting her, always lingering a few minutes longer than necessary. And then he asked for her number, and she gave it to him, even though she knew she should not. The affair that followed was not physical, not at first. It was conducted entirely through text messages, thousands of them over the course of several months. They talked about everything and nothing, about their pasts and their dreams and the lives they wished they were living. Mara complained about Nathan, about how he worked too much, about how he did not understand her, about how she felt invisible in her own life. Evan listened, or at least he seemed to, and he told her she deserved better, that she was too smart and too beautiful to waste her life on a farm in the middle of nowhere. And somewhere in those thousands of messages, the conversation shifted. It became less about escape and more about elimination. Mara started talking about how much easier her life would be if Nathan were gone, if she could collect the life insurance and start over somewhere new. Evan encouraged her, fed her fantasies, turned vague wishes into concrete plans. They researched life insurance policies, found out that Nathan had $250,000 in coverage. They talked about how they could make it look like an accident, a farming injury maybe, or a hunting mishap. But in the end, they settled on something simpler, something that required less planning and fewer variables. They decided to kill him while he slept. On a Saturday night in March, Nathan went to bed early. He had been working in the fields all day, and he was exhausted. The children were already asleep, tucked into their rooms down the hall. Mara told him she would be up soon, that she just wanted to finish watching a movie. He kissed her on the forehead, the kind of absent, automatic gesture that marked a long marriage, and climbed the stairs. He was asleep within minutes, lying on his back, snoring softly, completely unaware that his wife was downstairs texting the man who was about to kill him. Evan arrived just after midnight. He parked down the road, walked through the fields to avoid being seen, and entered the house through the back door, which Mara had left unlocked. She met him in the kitchen, handed him the gun she had taken from Nathan's safe, and pointed him toward the stairs. She did not go with him. She stayed in the kitchen, her hands shaking, her heart pounding, listening to the sound of footsteps moving through her house. Nathan never woke up. Evan shot him twice, once in the chest and once in the head, and the farmer who had worked his family's land for 40 years died without ever knowing why. Evan came back downstairs, handed the gun to Mara, and left the way he had come. And Mara, alone now in the silent house, called 911. She told them her husband had been shot, that someone had broken in, that she did not know who or why. She cried on the phone, great heaving sobs that sounded real because, in some part of her, they were. She had not expected to feel anything, but now that it was done, now that Nathan was dead upstairs in their bed, she felt everything. The police believed her at first. Why would they not? She was a grieving widow, a mother of 4, a woman with no criminal record and no obvious motive. They searched the property, looked for signs of forced entry, interviewed neighbors who had seen nothing unusual. They treated it as a random act of violence, a home invasion gone wrong, the kind of tragedy that could happen to anyone. And Mara played her part perfectly, crying at Nathan's funeral, accepting condolences from people who had known him his entire life, holding her children close and whispering that everything would be okay. But Nathan's family was not convinced. His brother, in particular, could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. There had been no forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. Nathan's wallet, his watch, his wedding ring were all still in the house. And Mara's reaction, while outwardly appropriate, seemed off somehow. Too controlled. Too rehearsed. He went to the police with his concerns, and they listened, though they were skeptical. Still, they agreed to take a closer look at Mara's phone records, just to be thorough. What they found changed everything. The text messages between Mara and Evan told the entire story. They had been careful to delete them from their phones, but they had not understood that deleted messages are not really gone, that technology leaves footprints even when people think they are covering their tracks. The forensic team recovered thousands of messages, and as they read through them, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This was not a crime of passion. It was not a moment of madness. It was premeditated murder, planned over months, discussed in meticulous detail, motivated by greed and a desire for a different life. Mara and Evan were arrested on the same day, 6 months after Nathan's death. The police came early in the morning, before the children woke up, and took Mara away in handcuffs. Her neighbors watched from their windows, shocked and disbelieving, struggling to reconcile the woman they knew with the woman being led to a police car. Evan did not resist. He seemed resigned, as if he had been waiting for this moment, as if he knew it was inevitable. The trial was a spectacle in a community that was not accustomed to such things. The courtroom was packed every day, filled with people who had known Nathan, who had worked alongside him, who could not understand how his wife had become his murderer. The prosecution presented the text messages, reading selected excerpts aloud in a voice that dripped with disgust. They showed the jury the life insurance policy, the timeline of events, the phone records that placed Evan near the coal farm on the night of the murder. They brought in digital forensic experts who explained how the data had been recovered, how it proved beyond any doubt that Mara and Evan had planned this together. The defense tried to argue that Mara had been manipulated, that Evan had preyed on her unhappiness, that she had never intended for things to go as far as they did. They painted her as a victim of her own circumstances, trapped in a marriage she did not want, seduced by a man who saw her as an easy mark. But the messages did not support that narrative. Mara had been an active participant, an equal partner in the planning. She had researched the insurance policy. She had left the door unlocked. She had handed Evan the gun. And after it was done, she had lied to everyone, had played the grieving widow, had attended her husband's funeral knowing she was the reason he was in the ground. The jury convicted both of them. Mara showed no emotion when the verdict was read. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face blank. Evan looked at her, as if hoping for some sign of solidarity, some acknowledgement of what they had shared, but she did not meet his eyes. She had already moved on, already detached herself from him, from the crime, from everything that had led to this moment. They were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in handing down the sentence, spoke about the sanctity of marriage, the trust that exists between husband and wife, the betrayal that made this crime particularly heinous. He spoke about Nathan's children, who were now orphans in every sense that mattered, who would grow up knowing that their mother had killed their father. And he spoke about the community, about how it would struggle to recover from the knowledge that such evil could exist in their midst. Nathan's children were placed with his brother and sister-in-law. They sold the farm, unable to bear the thought of staying in the house where their brother had been murdered. The money went into a trust for the children, to be used for their education, their futures, the life Nathan had wanted them to have. The community established a foundation in his name, dedicated to supporting families affected by violent crime. And slowly, painfully, life moved forward. But the questions remained. How had they missed it? Had there been signs, moments when Mara's unhappiness had been visible, opportunities to intervene before it was too late? Or was this the kind of darkness that hides so well that no one can see it coming? The people of Redfield Plains would debate these questions for years, in church basements and over coffee, in the quiet moments when they looked at their own marriages and wondered if they really knew the person lying beside them at night. The fourth story involves two murders that occurred 6 days apart, in two different states, connected only by the two men who committed them. It is a story about chaos, about minds fractured by drugs and paranoia, about violence that seemed to have no motive beyond the simple, terrifying fact that it could be done. It begins with a man named Lucas Reed, a drifter who had been moving from town to town for years, working odd jobs, sleeping in his car, existing on the margins of society. Lucas was not a criminal, or at least he had not been. He had grown up in a small town in Ohio, had a relatively normal childhood, had even started college before dropping out in his second year. But something had broken in him, some essential piece that held a life together, and he had been drifting ever since. He was lonely, damaged in ways he could not articulate, and when he met two men in a bar in a city called Westbridge District, he thought he had finally found something resembling friendship. The two men, whose names were Connor and Blake, were not friends in any meaningful sense. They were users, both of them addicted to methamphetamine, both of them paranoid and unpredictable. They saw Lucas as someone they could exploit, someone who was naive enough to believe their promises of easy money and good times. They invited him to stay with them, and he accepted, grateful for the company, for a place to sleep that was not his car. He did not realize that he was entering a world where reality was negotiable, where the line between thought and action had been erased by chemicals and desperation. The three of them spent several days together, using drugs, talking nonsense, feeding each other's delusions. Connor and Blake became convinced that Lucas was part of a conspiracy against them, that he was reporting their activities to the police, that he was planning to betray them. It was not true, of course. Lucas was not even coherent enough to plan anything. But in the twisted logic of methamphetamine psychosis, their paranoia made sense. And so, on a Tuesday afternoon, in a public park in the middle of Westbridge District, they attacked him. Blake stabbed Lucas 17 times with a kitchen knife. Connor held him down, kept him from escaping, while Blake drove the blade into his chest, his back, his neck. People nearby heard the commotion, saw what was happening, and called the police. But by the time officers arrived, Lucas was dead, and Connor and Blake were gone, running through the streets with no plan and no destination, just a vague sense that they needed to keep moving. They made it 200 miles before they ran out of gas. They abandoned the car on the side of a rural highway and started walking, heading toward a town called Clearwater Ridge. They were dirty, exhausted, still high but coming down hard, and they needed help. That is when they met Talia Moore. Talia was 23 years old, driving home from her shift at a local restaurant. She saw two men walking along the highway and did what any decent person would do. She pulled over and asked if they needed a ride. Connor and Blake told her they had broken down, that they just needed to get to the nearest town, that they would be grateful for any help. Talia believed them. She opened her car door and let them in, and in doing so, she signed her own death warrant. They did not attack her right away. She drove them toward Clearwater Ridge, making small talk, asking where they were from, what they were doing in the area. Connor and Blake gave vague answers, their paranoia building with every mile. They started to believe that Talia was part of the same conspiracy as Lucas, that she was leading them into a trap, that they needed to act before she turned them in. It was insane, irrational, completely divorced from reality. But that did not matter. In their minds, it was real, and they acted accordingly. Blake pulled the knife again. He stabbed Talia while she was driving, and the car veered off the road, crashing into a ditch. She tried to run, bleeding from multiple wounds, stumbling through a field toward the lights of a farmhouse in the distance. But Connor caught her, dragged her back, and the two of them finished what they had started. Talia Moore died in that field, alone except for her killers, crying for help that never came. A farmer found her body the next morning. He called the police, and within hours, the two crimes were connected. Lucas Reed's murder in Westbridge District and Talia Moore's murder in Clearwater Ridge had been committed by the same men, and those men were still out there, still armed, still dangerous. A multi-state manhunt began, with police from 3 jurisdictions working together to track down Connor and Blake before they could kill again. They were found 2 days later, hiding in an abandoned barn 20 miles from where Talia had died. They did not resist arrest. They were too exhausted, too sick from withdrawal, too broken by what they had done. When the detectives interviewed them, they confessed to both murders, though their accounts were disjointed, contradictory, filled with references to conspiracies that did not exist. They could not explain why they had killed Lucas, could not articulate what threat he had posed, and they could not explain why they had killed Talia, except to say that they had been scared, that they thought she was working against them, that they had to protect themselves. The legal proceedings were complicated by the fact that the murders had occurred in different states. Connor and Blake were extradited to face charges in both jurisdictions, and the trials were held separately. In Westbridge District, they were charged with the murder of Lucas Reed. In Clearwater Ridge, they faced charges for the murder of Talia Moore. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Security cameras in the park had captured footage of the attack on Lucas. DNA evidence linked them to both crime scenes. And their own confessions, rambling and incoherent as they were, provided details that only the killers could have known. The defense attorneys in both cases tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming that Connor and Blake had been so impaired by methamphetamine that they could not form the intent necessary for first-degree murder. They brought in experts who testified about the effects of long-term drug use, about how it could induce psychosis, about how it could make someone believe things that were not true. But the juries were not sympathetic. They saw two men who had made choices, who had picked up a knife and used it against innocent people, who had left behind grieving families and unanswered questions. Connor was convicted of both murders and sentenced to life without parole. Blake received the same sentence in the trial for Lucas Reed's murder, but in Clearwater Ridge, the jury recommended the death penalty. The judge agreed, citing the particular brutality of Talia's murder, the fact that she had tried to help them and had been killed for her kindness. Blake showed no reaction when the sentence was handed down. He simply stared at the table in front of him, his expression empty, as if he had already left his body behind. The families of the victims struggled to make sense of what had happened. Lucas Reed's mother spoke at both trials, her voice breaking as she described her son's struggles, his mental health issues, his inability to find his place in the world. She said that Lucas had been failed by a system that should have helped him, that he had been vulnerable and alone, and that Connor and Blake had exploited that vulnerability in the worst way possible. She did not ask for mercy for them. She asked only that people remember her son as more than a victim, as a person who had mattered, who had deserved better. Talia Moore's family was equally devastated. Her parents spoke about their daughter's kindness, her willingness to help anyone in need, the way she had always seen the best in people. They said that her compassion had been her greatest strength, and it had also been what killed her. They warned others to be cautious, to protect themselves, to understand that not everyone who asks for help deserves trust. It was a painful lesson, one that contradicted everything Talia had believed, but it was the only lesson left. The fifth and final story takes place in a town called Silver Creek, a quiet community in Northern California where the hills rolled green in winter and golden in summer. It was a place where high school football games drew crowds, where families gathered at the local diner on Sunday mornings, where teenagers counted down the days until they could leave for college in bigger cities. It was a place that felt safe, the kind of place where parents let their kids walk home alone after dark, where people did not lock their doors, where tragedy was something that happened elsewhere. Lena Morales was 19 years old, a recent high school graduate who was planning to attend college in the fall. She was smart, responsible, well-liked by teachers and classmates alike. She worked part-time at a bookstore, saved most of her earnings, and spent her free time with a close group of friends. She was not the kind of person who took risks, not the kind of person who made impulsive decisions. She was careful, thoughtful, the kind of daughter every parent hoped to raise. On New Year's Eve, Lena went to a party at a friend's house. It was a typical gathering for Silver Creek, a few dozen teenagers in someone's basement, music playing, pizza ordered, parents upstairs making sure things did not get out of hand. Lena had not planned to stay long. She did not drink, did not like loud crowds, but her friends had convinced her to come, and she agreed because it was New Year's Eve, because she wanted to celebrate the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Among the people at the party was a boy named Mark Alvarez. Mark was a year younger than Lena, a senior at the local high school, popular in the way that athletes often are. He played varsity football, had a wide circle of friends, and was generally considered a good kid. He and Lena had known each other for years, had been in classes together, had mutual friends, but they were not close. They existed in the same small-town ecosystem, but occupied different corners of it. As the night wore on, people began drinking. Lena noticed and decided it was time to leave. She offered to give rides to anyone who needed them, not wanting her friends to drive impaired. Several people took her up on the offer, and she spent the next hour shuttling classmates home, making sure everyone got back safely. Mark was the last person in her car. He lived on the outskirts of town, and Lena agreed to drop him off, even though it meant driving in the opposite direction from her own house. The drive started normally. They made small talk, talked about school, about plans for the new year, about nothing in particular. But as they got closer to Mark's house, his demeanor changed. He started making comments that made Lena uncomfortable, compliments that felt too personal, suggestions that she should come inside when they arrived. Lena deflected, kept her tone light, tried to signal that she was not interested without being confrontational. She just wanted to drop him off and go home. But when they reached his house, Mark did not get out of the car. Instead, he leaned toward her, put his hand on her arm, and told her he liked her, that he had always liked her, that he wanted to spend more time with her. Lena gently removed his hand and told him she was flattered but not interested, that she valued their friendship, that she thought he was a nice person but she did not see him that way. It was kind, diplomatic, the sort of rejection that should have ended the conversation. Mark did not take it well. His expression shifted, hardened, and he called her names, accused her of leading him on, said she thought she was too good for him. Lena was shocked by the sudden change, by the anger in his voice. She told him to get out of the car, that she was not going to listen to this, that he needed to go inside and sleep it off. He got out, but he did not go inside. He stood by the car door, glaring at her, and said something that would haunt her in the minutes she had left. He said, "You will regret this." Lena drove away, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She called a friend, told her what had happened, said she felt uneasy but was heading home and would text when she got there. She never sent that text, because Mark had gotten into his own car and followed her. Lena did not realize she was being followed until she was halfway home. She saw headlights behind her, noticed they were staying close, and felt a spike of fear. She sped up, hoping to lose them, but the car behind her matched her speed. She grabbed her phone, tried to dial 911, but she was driving too fast, was too panicked to focus. And then she made a decision that probably saved her life, at least temporarily. She pulled into the parking lot of a church. The church was old, built of stone, with a tall steeple that was lit up at night. It sat on the main road through town, visible to anyone driving by, and Lena thought that if she could get inside, if she could lock herself in, she would be safe until the police arrived. She abandoned her car and ran to the church doors, pounding on them, screaming for help. The doors were locked. The building was empty. There was no one to hear her. Mark pulled into the parking lot behind her. He got out of his car, walked toward her with a purpose that was chilling in its calmness. Lena turned and ran, heading for the road, hoping a passing car would see her, would stop, would help. But the road was empty. It was late, past midnight, and everyone was home celebrating the new year. There was no one to save her. Mark caught her in the shadow of the church. He grabbed her, threw her to the ground, and began hitting her. Lena fought back, scratched his face, tried to scream, but he was stronger, fueled by rage and alcohol and wounded pride. And then he pulled out a knife, a small folding blade he kept in his pocket, and he stabbed her. Once, twice, 3 times. Lena stopped fighting. She stopped screaming. She lay on the cold ground, bleeding, dying, while Mark stood over her, breathing hard, trying to understand what he had just done. He panicked. He got back in his car and drove home, left Lena's body in the church parking lot, and went to bed as if nothing had happened. But Lena's phone, which had fallen from her hand during the struggle, had been recording. She had managed to activate a voice recording app in her panic, and it had captured everything. Mark's voice, his threats, the sounds of the attack. It was all there, preserved in digital form, waiting to be discovered. A jogger found Lena's body the next morning. The police were called, and the investigation began immediately. They found her phone, listened to the recording, and within hours, they had a suspect. Mark Alvarez was arrested at his home later that day, still in the clothes he had worn the night before, clothes that were stained with Lena's blood. He denied everything at first, claimed he had dropped Lena off and gone straight home, said he had no idea what had happened to her. But the evidence was irrefutable. The recording, the blood, the scratches on his face where Lena had fought back, DNA under her fingernails that matched his. He confessed the next day. His lawyer tried to stop him, but Mark insisted. He said he was sorry, that he had not meant for things to go that far, that he had been drunk and angry and had made a terrible mistake. But sorry did not bring Lena back. Sorry did not undo the horror of her last moments, the fear she must have felt, the betrayal of being hunted by someone she had tried to help. The trial was swift. Mark Alvarez pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, sparing Lena's family the ordeal of reliving her death in court. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in delivering the sentence, spoke directly to Mark, told him that he had taken a bright, kind, generous young woman from the world, that he had destroyed not just her life, but the lives of everyone who loved her. He said that Mark would have decades to think about what he had done, to live with the knowledge that his inability to accept rejection had turned him into a murderer. Lena's parents established a scholarship in her name, awarded each year to a graduating senior who demonstrated kindness, academic excellence, and a commitment to helping others. They spoke at schools about the dangers of entitlement, about teaching young men that rejection is not an insult, that no one owes them affection or attention, that violence is never an acceptable response to hurt feelings. They turned their grief into action, hoping that by sharing Lena's story, they might prevent another family from experiencing the same loss. Silver Creek struggled to reconcile the Mark they thought they knew with the Mark who had murdered Lena Morales. He had been popular, well-liked, a student-athlete with a promising future. People talked about him in glowing terms, called him a good kid, said they could not believe he was capable of such violence. But Lena's friends knew better. They came forward after the arrest, told stories about Mark's temper, his possessiveness, the way he reacted when girls turned him down. There had been warning signs, small moments of concerning behavior that people had dismissed as immaturity, as boys being boys, as nothing to worry about. But those small moments had been building blocks, pieces of a personality that was always capable of violence, that had just been waiting for the right trigger. The town held a vigil for Lena, hundreds of people gathering in the same church parking lot where she had died. They lit candles, shared memories, wept for a future that would never happen. Lena had been planning to study education, had wanted to become a teacher, to work with children, to make a difference in the world. She had been kind, thoughtful, the sort of person who went out of her way to help others. And she had died because she had offered a ride to someone who needed one, because she had trusted that doing the right thing would keep her safe. Now, as these 5 stories draw to a close, it is important to step back and look at what connects them. These murders did not happen in a vacuum. They were not random acts committed by strangers. They were intimate betrayals, crimes committed by people who were known, trusted, integrated into the lives of their victims. Daniel Mercer was killed by his wife and her brother. Rachel Holloway was murdered by a stranger, but she died because she was home, because she had opened her door to a world that was more dangerous than she knew. Nathan Cole was shot by his wife's lover while he slept in his own bed. Lucas Reed and Talia Moore were killed by men they had tried to help. men whose minds had been fractured by drugs and paranoia. Lena Morales died at the hands of someone she had known for years, someone she had tried to get home safely. The patterns are clear, even if they are uncomfortable. Trust can be weaponized. Kindness can be fatal. The people we think we know are often strangers wearing familiar faces. And the violence that erupts in these stories does not announce itself. It builds slowly, quietly, in spaces we are not looking, in moments we dismiss as unimportant. Elena Mercer's addiction was visible to anyone paying attention, but Daniel made excuses, covered for her, hoped that love would be enough. Mara Cole's unhappiness was something her friends might have noticed if they had asked the right questions, if they had looked past the surface. Mark Alvarez's entitlement, his inability to handle rejection, had been on display for years, but people explained it away, called it normal teenage behavior, refused to see it for what it was. These stories force us to confront difficult truths. The first is that safety is often an illusion. We believe we are safe because we live in quiet towns, because we know our neighbors, because violence is something that happens to other people. But safety is not a place. It is not guaranteed by geography or community. It is fragile, easily shattered, dependent on factors we cannot control. The second truth is that the people we love, the people we trust, are capable of things we cannot imagine. Elena Mercer loved Daniel once, or at least she must have. Mara Cole married Nathan, had children with him, built a life with him. And yet both women participated in the planning and execution of their husbands' murders. Love is not a shield against violence. Sometimes it is the very thing that makes violence possible. The third truth is perhaps the hardest. We are complicit in these tragedies, not individually but collectively, because we choose not to see what is in front of us. We dismiss warning signs, rationalize concerning behavior, tell ourselves that we are overreacting, that things are not as bad as they seem. We value politeness over safety, comfort over truth. We do not want to believe that the nice man down the street beats his wife, that the popular high school athlete is capable of murder, that the friend who seems a little off might be planning something terrible. And so we do not ask questions. We do not intervene. We wait until it is too late, and then we express shock, say we never saw it coming, mourn the loss of people who might have been saved if we had been willing to look. But there is also a fourth truth, one that offers a glimmer of something that is not quite hope, but is close. These stories, as dark as they are not the full picture of humanity. For every person who commits violence, there are thousands who choose kindness. For every betrayal, there are countless acts of loyalty. For every murder, there are lives saved by people who intervene, who ask the hard questions, who refuse to look away. Caleb Holloway chose forgiveness when he could have chosen vengeance. Talia Moore stopped to help two strangers, an act of compassion that cost her life, but also spoke to the best of what people can be. Lena Morales spent her last hours making sure her friends got home safely, putting others before herself in a way that was consistent with the person she had always been. The challenge, then, is to learn from these stories without becoming paralyzed by fear, to be cautious without becoming cynical, to protect ourselves and the people we love without losing our capacity for trust. It is a difficult balance, one that requires us to pay attention, to listen to our instincts, to take warning signs seriously even when it is uncomfortable. It requires us to have difficult conversations, to confront people when their behavior is concerning, to prioritize safety over social harmony. It also requires us to change the way we think about violence. We have been conditioned to believe that violence is the domain of monsters, of people who are fundamentally different from us. But the truth, as these stories make painfully clear, is that violence is often committed by ordinary people, people who look normal, who have jobs and families and friends. They are not monsters. They are people who have made monstrous choices, and those choices are often the result of circumstances that could have been changed, interventions that could have been made, help that could have been offered. Elena Mercer's addiction could have been treated. Mara Cole's unhappiness could have been addressed through therapy, through honest conversation, through a recognition that a marriage was failing and needed to end. Connor and Blake's descent into drug-fueled paranoia could have been interrupted if mental health resources had been available, if someone had cared enough to get them help. Mark Alvarez's entitlement could have been challenged by parents, by teachers, by peers who refused to tolerate disrespect toward women. These are not excuses. Nothing excuses the choices these people made, the lives they took, the families they destroyed. But understanding the conditions that lead to violence is not the same as excusing it. Understanding is the first step toward prevention. The families left behind by these crimes carry burdens that most of us can only imagine. Nathan Cole's children will grow up knowing their mother killed their father. Isaiah Holloway will never remember his mother, will know her only through photographs and stories, will have to reconcile the fact that she was taken from him in the most brutal way imaginable. Daniel Mercer's friends and customers lost a pillar of their community, a man who had made their lives better simply by being in them. Lucas Reed's mother lost a son who had been struggling for years, who had needed help and had not received it. Talia Moore's parents lost a daughter whose kindness was her defining characteristic. Lena Morales' parents lost a young woman on the verge of adulthood, a person who had been full of potential and promise. These losses are not abstract. They are real, permanent, devastating, and they ripple outward, affecting not just immediate family but entire communities. The people of Harbor Point still talk about Daniel Mercer, still remember the bar that used to be the heart of their town. The members of Rachel Holloway's church still struggle with questions about faith and forgiveness, still debate whether Caleb's decision to forgive Marcus Wade was an act of grace or a failure of justice. The farmers of Redfield Plains still wonder how they missed the signs that Mara Cole was capable of murder. The residents of Silver Creek still lock their doors at night, still worry about their children in ways they did not before Lena died. But life continues. It has to. The sun rises, the seasons change, and people find ways to carry their grief. They establish foundations and scholarships. They speak at schools and conferences. They share their stories, hoping that by doing so, they can prevent others from experiencing the same pain. They transform their loss into purpose, their anger into action. It does not make the pain go away. It does not bring back the people who were taken, but it gives meaning to senseless deaths, creates something positive out of darkness. And there are lessons in these stories, if we are willing to learn them. The first lesson is to trust our instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If a relationship makes you uneasy, if a person's behavior seems off, if you notice changes in someone you love that cannot be explained, pay attention. Do not dismiss your concerns as overreaction. Do not let politeness or fear of confrontation keep you from asking questions. Your instincts exist for a reason, honed by thousands of years of evolution, designed to keep you safe. Listen to them. The second lesson is to take addiction seriously. Elena Mercer's addiction was not a private struggle that affected only her. It destroyed her marriage, led to her husband's murder, and ultimately landed her in prison for life. Connor and Blake's drug use did not just harm them. It turned them into killers who destroyed the lives of people who had tried to help them. Addiction is a disease, yes, but it is a disease with consequences that extend far beyond the person suffering from it. If someone you love is struggling with addiction, do not enable them. Do not make excuses. Get them help, even if they do not want it, even if it damages your relationship. The alternative, as these stories show, can be far worse. The third lesson is about communication. Mara Cole's unhappiness in her marriage was real. She felt trapped, invisible, unfulfilled. But instead of addressing those feelings honestly, instead of seeking counseling or asking for a divorce, she chose murder. If she and Nathan had been able to communicate, if they had created a space where difficult truths could be spoken, perhaps things would have ended differently. Marriages fail. People grow apart. These are painful realities, but they are not tragedies. What happened to Nathan Cole was a tragedy. What could have been a divorce became a murder because two people could not or would not talk to each other about what was really happening. The fourth lesson is about teaching young people, especially young men, about rejection and consent. Mark Alvarez killed Lena Morales because he could not handle being told no. He felt entitled to her affection, and when she refused him, he interpreted that refusal as an insult that justified violence. This is not an isolated case. It is a pattern that repeats itself in bars and parking lots and college campuses, in homes and workplaces and churches. We must teach children, from the earliest age, that no one owes them attention or affection, that rejection is not an attack on their worth, that violence is never an acceptable response to hurt feelings. We must model healthy relationships, call out concerning behavior, and create consequences for entitlement and aggression before they escalate into violence. The fifth lesson is about the power of technology, both as a tool for crime and as a tool for justice. Mara and Evan thought they had covered their tracks by deleting their text messages, but they did not understand that deleted data can be recovered. The recording on Lena's phone captured her murder, providing evidence that led directly to her killer. Security cameras, phone records, digital footprints, these are the tools that solve crimes in the modern age. But they are also tools that can be used to plan crimes, to stalk victims, to coordinate violence. We must be aware of how our digital lives intersect with our physical safety, how the information we share and the traces we leave can be used against us. The sixth and perhaps most important lesson is about the value of community. When Daniel Mercer died, his community mourned. When Rachel Holloway was murdered, her church rallied around Caleb and Isaiah. When Nathan Cole was killed, his family and friends ensured that his children were cared for. When Lena Morales died, the people of Silver Creek came together to honor her memory and support her parents. These communities were not perfect. They had missed warning signs, had failed to intervene when intervention might have made a difference. But in the aftermath of tragedy, they showed up. They provided support, created memorials, established foundations, turned grief into action. Community is not a guarantee against violence, but it is a buffer against the isolation that makes violence more likely and the despair that follows it. Now, think about your own life. Think about the people you know, the relationships you have, the communities you are part of. Are there warning signs you have been ignoring? Is there someone who needs help but is too proud or too scared to ask for it? Is there a conversation you have been avoiding because it would be uncomfortable? These stories are not just about other people, other families, other towns. They are about the choices all of us make, the risks we take, the moments when we decide whether to speak up or stay silent. You cannot prevent every tragedy. Some things are beyond your control, products of chance and circumstance, and the unpredictable nature of human behavior. But you can pay attention. You can ask questions. You can refuse to accept easy explanations for behavior that concerns you. You can be the person who intervenes, who offers help, who takes threats seriously even when everyone else is dismissing them. You can teach your children to value honesty and communication, to handle rejection with grace, to seek help when they are struggling. You can build communities that support people in crisis instead of shaming them, that prioritize safety over reputation, that create spaces where difficult truths can be spoken. These 5 stories have taken you through betrayal and violence, through moments of horror and loss that are difficult to contemplate. But they have also shown you resilience, forgiveness, the capacity of people to transform grief into purpose. Caleb Holloway forgave the man who murdered his wife, an act that defied logic and stirred fierce debate, but also demonstrated a commitment to principles that transcended personal pain. Nathan Cole's family ensured that his children would have the future he wanted for them. Lena Morales' parents created a scholarship that would help other young people pursue their dreams. These acts do not erase the crimes. They do not bring back the dead, but they prove that even in the darkest moments, there is room for light. As you drift toward sleep, let these stories settle into your mind. Not as nightmares, though they contain elements that could fuel nightmares, but as warnings. As reminders that safety is not guaranteed, that trust must be earned and continuously reaffirmed, that the people we think we know are capable of surprising us in terrible ways. But also as reminders that we are not powerless, that our choices matter, that paying attention and taking action can save lives. The world is full of Daniel Mercers, kind people who give more than they receive, who anchor communities, who make life better for everyone around them. It is also full of people like Elena Mercer, people struggling with addictions and resentments that they hide behind smiles and excuses. It contains people like Rachel Holloway, whose faith and kindness were genuine and deep, and people like Marcus Wade, whose choices destroyed lives and futures. It includes marriages like Nathan and Mara Cole's, where one partner's unhappiness festered into murderous intent, and friendships like the one Lena Morales thought she had with Mark Alvarez, where trust was betrayed in the most violent way possible. The question is not whether these kinds of people and situations exist. They do, and they always will. The question is what we do with that knowledge. Do we become cynical, suspicious, afraid to trust anyone? Do we withdraw from community, avoid connection, build walls around ourselves and the people we love? Or do we become more engaged, more aware, more willing to have difficult conversations and take uncomfortable actions when necessary? Do we use these stories as a reason to give up on humanity or as a call to be better, to do better, to create the kind of world where these tragedies become rarer? There are no easy answers. But there are answers, and they start with each of us, in the small decisions we make every day. The decision to check in on a friend who seems withdrawn. The decision to report concerning behavior, even if it might be nothing. The decision to teach our children about healthy relationships, about boundaries, about the difference between love and possession. The decision to get help for addiction, to end a marriage that has become toxic, to speak truth even when it is painful. These decisions will not prevent every tragedy, but they will prevent some. And that has to be enough. So rest now. Let your mind process these stories, these patterns, these lessons. And when you wake, carry them with you. Not as burdens, but as tools. Not as reasons to fear, but as reasons to pay attention, to care, to act. The people in these stories, the victims and the survivors, deserve to be remembered. They deserve to have their stories told, their losses acknowledged, their legacies honored. And we, the living, the ones who hear these stories and go on with our lives, we owe it to them to learn, to change, to be better. Daniel Mercer deserved a wife who valued his life more than his money. Rachel Holloway deserved to raise her children in peace. Nathan Cole deserved honesty instead of betrayal. Lucas Reed and Talia Moore deserved to be helped, not murdered. Lena Morales deserved to grow up, to become a teacher, to make the difference she had always wanted to make. They all deserved better than they got. And the only way to honor them is to work toward a world where stories like theirs become impossible. That is the challenge these 5 cases present. Not just to understand them, not just to be horrified by them, but to use them. To let them change how we see the world, how we interact with the people around us, how we respond when something feels wrong. These stories are dark, yes. They are disturbing. They contain violence and betrayal and losses that can never be repaired. But they are also true, and truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is always valuable. So as you close your eyes tonight, think about the people you love. Think about the communities you are part of. Think about the choices you make and the impact those choices have. Think about the ways you can make the world a little bit safer, a little bit kinder, a little bit more honest. Because in the end, that is all any of us can do. We cannot prevent every tragedy, but we can prevent some. We cannot save everyone, but we can save someone. And that, in a world that often feels overwhelming and dangerous, has to be enough. The weight of these stories is heavy, and it should be. They represent real pain, real loss, real families who will never be whole again. But they also represent opportunities. Opportunities to learn, to grow, to become more aware and more engaged. Opportunities to break cycles of violence, to intervene before situations escalate, to create systems and communities that support people instead of abandoning them. These opportunities exist in every moment, in every interaction, in every choice we make about how to live and who to be. Consider the people who work in victim advocacy, in addiction treatment, in mental health services. They have dedicated their lives to preventing the kinds of tragedies you have heard about tonight. They see the warning signs that most people miss. They intervene in situations that could turn violent. They provide support to people who are struggling, who are scared, who do not know where to turn. These people are heroes, though they would probably reject that label. They are simply doing what needs to be done, filling gaps that society leaves open, catching people before they fall too far. But they cannot do it alone. They need support from the rest of us, from people who are willing to fund their programs, to refer people who need help, to take their warnings seriously. They need a culture that values prevention as much as punishment, that understands that intervening early is always better than responding to tragedy after it has occurred. They need communities that are willing to have difficult conversations, to acknowledge uncomfortable truths, to prioritize safety over comfort. Think about the role of education. So many of these tragedies could have been prevented if people had better understood the warning signs of addiction, the dynamics of abusive relationships, the psychology of entitlement and violence. But most people do not learn these things in school. They are not taught how to recognize when someone is in crisis, how to de-escalate a situation, how to seek help when they or someone they love is struggling. These are life skills, essential for navigating a complex and often dangerous world, but they are not part of most curricula. We teach algebra and history and literature, all important subjects, but we do not teach people how to protect themselves and each other from the kinds of violence that destroy lives and communities. That needs to change. We need to incorporate education about healthy relationships, about consent, about mental health, about the warning signs of violence into every level of schooling. We need to teach children that it is okay to ask for help, that struggling does not make you weak, that there are resources available when things feel overwhelming. We need to teach teenagers about the dangers of entitlement, about the importance of respecting boundaries, about what to do when someone makes them uncomfortable. And we need to teach adults that they have a responsibility to pay attention, to intervene, to create safe spaces for people to disclose abuse or addiction or suicidal thoughts. Consider also the role of technology companies. The evidence that convicted Mara Cole and Evan Brooks, that identified Mark Alvarez as Lena's killer, came from digital sources. Text messages, phone records, voice recordings. These companies hold vast amounts of data about our lives, and that data can be crucial in solving crimes. But it can also be used to facilitate crimes, to stalk victims, to coordinate violence. Technology companies have a responsibility to balance privacy with safety, to cooperate with law enforcement when lives are at stake, to design their products in ways that minimize harm. At the same time, individuals need to be aware of their digital footprints. The messages you send, the photos you post, the locations you share, all of this creates a record that can be accessed by people with the right tools and the right motivations. This is not a reason to avoid technology, but it is a reason to be thoughtful about how you use it. Be aware of who has access to your information. Protect your passwords. Think before you share. And if you are in a situation where you feel unsafe, know that your phone can be both a lifeline and a record of what happened. Now think about the criminal justice system. These 5 cases all resulted in convictions, which is a testament to the work of investigators, prosecutors, and juries who took their responsibilities seriously. But not every case ends this way. Many murders go unsolved. Many perpetrators are never caught. Many victims never see justice. The system is imperfect, strained by limited resources, by overwhelming caseloads, by biases and gaps that allow some people to slip through. Improving the criminal justice system requires investment in training, in technology, in personnel. It requires reforms that address racial and economic disparities, that ensure everyone has access to competent legal representation, that prioritize rehabilitation as well as punishment. It requires a recognition that punishment alone does not prevent crime, that creating conditions where people have opportunities and support is far more effective than simply locking them up after they have committed violence. But it also requires a cultural shift. We need to move away from a mindset that sees criminals as monsters, as fundamentally different from us, and toward a recognition that most people who commit crimes are responding to circumstances that could be changed. This does not mean excusing violence. It does not mean failing to hold people accountable. It means understanding that prevention is possible, that intervention can make a difference, that people are capable of change if they are given the right support at the right time. Think about Caleb Holloway's decision to forgive Marcus Wade. It was controversial, divisive, difficult for many people to accept, but it was also rooted in a deep understanding of what Rachel would have wanted, of the principles she lived by, of the kind of world she was trying to create. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean erasing the crime or the pain it caused. It means choosing not to let hatred consume you, not to let the person who hurt you continue to have power over your life. It is an incredibly difficult choice, one that most people could not make, but it is also a powerful one. Not everyone can or should forgive. Some crimes are too heinous, some loss is too great. Nathan Cole's children may never forgive their mother, and they should not be expected to. Talia Moore's parents may never forgive the men who killed their daughter, and that is their right. Forgiveness is a personal decision, one that depends on individual circumstances and beliefs. But it is worth considering, worth thinking about, worth recognizing as a possibility even in the darkest situations. Because holding on to hatred, onto rage, onto the desire for revenge, it hurts you more than it hurts the person you hate. It keeps you trapped in the moment of your greatest pain, unable to move forward, unable to heal. Forgiveness, when it is possible, is a gift you give yourself. It is a way of reclaiming your life, of refusing to let the person who hurt you define who you become. Now, as these stories draw to a close, it is time to reflect on what they mean, on what you can take from them. These are not stories designed to entertain, though they may have held your attention. They are not stories designed to shock, though they contain shocking elements. They are stories designed to teach, to warn, to illuminate the dark corners of human behavior that most people would rather ignore. They are uncomfortable because they force us to confront truths we would rather not acknowledge, to see ourselves and the people we love with clearer eyes. The truth is that anyone can become a victim. Daniel Mercer, Rachel Holloway, Nathan Cole, Lucas Reed, Talia Moore, Lena Morales. They were all ordinary people living ordinary lives until violence found them. They were not reckless. They were not careless. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they trusted the wrong person, or they made a choice that seemed reasonable in the moment but turned out to be fatal. This is terrifying, and it should be. But it is also reality. The other truth is that anyone can become a perpetrator. Elena Mercer was not born a murderer. Mara Cole did not start her marriage planning to kill her husband. Marcus Wade, Connor, Blake, Mark Alvarez, they were all children once, infants held by mothers who loved them, who hoped for bright futures for them. But somewhere along the way, things went wrong. Addictions took hold. Mental illnesses went untreated. Entitlement was allowed to fester. And ordinary people made choices that turned them into killers. This is not an excuse. It is an explanation. And understanding the difference between the two is crucial. An excuse removes responsibility, suggests that the person had no choice, that circumstances forced their hand. An explanation acknowledges that circumstances matter, that choices are made in context, that people are products of their environments and their experiences. Elena Mercer chose to participate in her husband's murder, and she deserves to be held accountable for that choice. But she also struggled with an addiction that was not adequately treated, that isolated her and drove her to desperation. Both things can be true. As you process these stories, it is natural to feel a range of emotions. Fear, because the world seems more dangerous than it did before. Anger, because the victims deserved better and the perpetrators deserve punishment. Sadness, because the losses are real and permanent and devastating. But also hope, because for every person who commits violence, there are thousands who choose kindness. For every betrayal, there are countless acts of loyalty. For every tragedy, there are people working to prevent the next one. The stories you have heard tonight represent the worst of what people are capable of, but they do not represent all of what people are capable of. They are outliers, extreme cases, moments when everything went wrong in the most terrible ways. They are not the norm. Most marriages do not end in murder. Most people who struggle with addiction do not kill anyone. Most teenagers who face rejection do not respond with violence. Most strangers who ask for help are not planning to hurt you. The world is not as dangerous as these stories might make it seem. But it is dangerous enough that we need to pay attention, to be cautious, to protect ourselves and the people we love. So what do you do with this information? How do you live in a world where these things can happen without becoming paralyzed by fear? The answer is balance. You stay aware without becoming paranoid. You trust people, but verify that trust over time. You offer help, but set boundaries. You love deeply, but keep your eyes open for warning signs. You build communities, but acknowledge that communities can fail. You have faith in humanity, but recognize that some people will betray that faith. It is a difficult balance, one that requires constant adjustment, constant vigilance. But it is possible. Millions of people navigate this balance every day, creating lives that are both connected and safe, both generous and protected. They teach their children to be kind, but cautious. They maintain relationships, but in them when they become toxic. They offer second chances, but not third or fourth ones. They live full, rich lives without pretending that danger does not exist. Part of achieving this balance is developing good instincts and then trusting them. Your body often knows when something is wrong before your mind catches up. That feeling in your stomach when someone makes you uncomfortable, that hesitation before you agree to something you are not sure about, that voice in your head warning you to be careful, these are not random. They are signals, honed by evolution, designed to keep you safe. Listen to them. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And even if you are wrong, Even if your instincts are giving you a false alarm, the cost of being cautious is far lower than the cost of ignoring a real threat. Another part of the balance is building a support network. The people in these stories who survived, who found ways to move forward after tragedy, did not do it alone. They had families, friends, communities who rallied around them, who provided practical help and emotional support, who reminded them that they were not alone. If you are struggling, if you are in a situation that feels dangerous, if you know someone who needs help, reach out. Talk to someone you trust. Call a hotline. Contact the police. Do not try to handle it alone, because isolation makes everything harder and more dangerous. And finally, part of the balance is recognizing that you cannot control everything. You can do everything right, take every precaution, make every smart choice, and still become a victim. The world is unpredictable, and sometimes terrible things happen to people who do not deserve them. This is not a reason to give up, to stop trying, to live in constant fear. It is simply a fact, one that should inform how you think about safety and risk without paralyzing you. Now, before we end, there is one more thing to consider. These stories have focused on the victims and the perpetrators, but there is another group of people affected by these crimes: the families of the perpetrators. Elena Mercer's parents, who raised a daughter and watched her become a murderer. Mara Cole's children, who lost both parents, one to death and one to prison. Mark Alvarez's family, who thought they knew him and discovered they did not. These people did nothing wrong, but they carry the weight of crimes they did not commit, the shame of being related to someone who did something terrible. They are often forgotten in the aftermath of tragedy, dismissed, or even blamed for the actions of their loved ones. But they are victims too, in a different way. They lost the person they thought they knew. They lost their sense of safety and stability. They became pariahs in communities that once welcomed them. And they live with questions that have no good answers. How did I miss the signs? Could I have done something differently? What does it say about me that I loved someone capable of this? These questions are particularly acute for parents. Every mother and father wants to believe they raised their child well, that they instilled good values, that they would recognize if something was seriously wrong. But the parents of murderers often had no idea what their children were capable of. They saw the same person everyone else saw, the public face that hid private darkness. And when the truth came out, they were left to grapple with guilt and grief and confusion that will never fully resolve. It is worth remembering these people, worth extending compassion to them even as we hold their loved ones accountable for their crimes. They did not choose this. They did not ask to be related to a murderer. They are simply trying to survive, to make sense of the incomprehensible, to rebuild lives that have been shattered by association. As this long journey through darkness comes to an end, take a moment to think about everything you have heard. 5 murders, 5 families destroyed, 5 communities forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the people living among them. But also 5 opportunities to learn, to grow, to become more aware and more engaged. These stories are not entertainment. They are warnings, lessons, calls to action. They warn us that the people we trust can betray us, that safety is not guaranteed, that violence can erupt in places we thought were safe. They teach us to pay attention to warning signs, to take addiction and mental illness seriously, to have difficult conversations, to build communities that support people in crisis. And they call us to action, to do better, to be better, to create a world where these tragedies become less common. The victims in these stories cannot be brought back. Their families will carry their grief for the rest of their lives. The communities they lived in will never be quite the same. But their stories can serve a purpose. They can make us more vigilant, more compassionate, more willing to intervene when we see someone struggling. They can inspire us to support the organizations and individuals working to prevent violence, to fund addiction treatment and mental health services, to create systems that catch people before they fall. And perhaps most importantly, these stories can remind us of the preciousness of life, of how quickly it can be taken, of how important it is to cherish the people we love while we have them. Daniel Mercer's friends wish they had told him more often how much he meant to them. Lena Morales' parents wish they had one more conversation with their daughter. Caleb Holloway wishes he had been home the day Rachel died, though there was nothing he could have done to change what happened. We all have people in our lives we take for granted, assuming they will always be there, always be available for one more conversation, one more hug, one more chance to say the things we have been meaning to say. Do not wait. Tell the people you love that you love them. Have the difficult conversations you have been avoiding. Address the problems you have been ignoring. Because life is fragile, and tomorrow is not guaranteed, and the last thing you want is to be left with regrets about words unsaid and actions not taken. These 5 cases have taken you through hours of darkness, through stories of betrayal and violence that are difficult to hear and impossible to forget. But they have also shown you resilience, community, the capacity of people to transform grief into purpose. They have demonstrated that even in the worst moments, there are choices to be made, actions to be taken, ways to honor the dead by protecting the living. So as you prepare to sleep, let these stories settle. Let them inform how you see the world, how you interact with people, how you assess risk and make choices. But do not let them consume you. Do not let them turn you into someone who is afraid to trust, afraid to love, afraid to offer help when it is needed. The goal is not to live in fear, but to live with awareness, to balance caution with compassion, to protect yourself while still remaining open to connection. The world is a complicated place, full of beauty and horror, kindness and cruelty, hope and despair. These stories represent the horror, the cruelty, the despair. But they exist alongside countless stories of love and sacrifice and courage that never make the news because they are too ordinary, too quiet, too common. For every person who commits murder, there are millions who spend their lives helping others, who make the world a little bit better every day through small acts of kindness and care. Remember that. Remember that these stories, as important as they are, represent a tiny fraction of human experience. Remember that most people are good, that most relationships are healthy, that most communities are safe. But also remember to pay attention, to ask questions, to intervene when something feels wrong. The balance between trust and caution is delicate, but it is achievable. And as you drift off tonight, know that you are safer now than you were before you heard these stories. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You know more, understand more, are more aware of the warning signs and the patterns that precede violence. You are better equipped to protect yourself and the people you love. You have tools you did not have before, knowledge that can save lives if you use it wisely. Sleep well, rest easy, and when you wake, carry these lessons with you, not as burdens, but as gifts. Gifts given by people who suffered terribly, who lost everything, but whose stories can still serve a purpose. They cannot speak for themselves anymore, but their stories speak for them, warning us, teaching us, calling us to be better. And if their stories prevent even one tragedy, if they save even one life, then they will have served the highest purpose any story can serve. They will have transformed darkness into light, loss into hope, death into a reason to live more fully, more carefully, more compassionately. That is the legacy these victims deserve. That is the lesson their families hope others will learn. That is the gift you can give them by paying attention, by caring, by refusing to look away from difficult truths. These stories are hard. They are meant to be. But they are also valuable, essential, worth the discomfort they cause. Because in the end, the only thing worse than knowing about these kinds of tragedies is remaining ignorant of them, unprepared for them, unable to recognize them until it is too late. You now know. You have been warned. You have been educated. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. But make no mistake, it matters. Your choices matter. Your awareness matters. Your willingness to act when you see warning signs, to help when help is needed, to speak up when something feels wrong. It all matters. You are not powerless. You are not helpless. You have agency, and you have the ability to make a difference. So use it. Honor these victims by learning from their stories. Protect the people around you by paying attention. Create the kind of world where betrayal is less common, where violence is rarer, where help is available to those who need it. It is a tall order, an ambitious goal, but it starts with individual choices made by individual people. It starts with you. Before the final words of this long night are spoken, consider one more thing. The act of listening to these stories, of bearing witness to these tragedies, is itself a form of honoring the dead. These victims cannot tell their own stories. Their voices were silenced by violence, their futures stolen by people they trusted or tried to help. But their stories live on, carried by people like you who take the time to listen, to learn, to remember. When you remember Daniel Mercer, You keep alive the memory of a man who gave more than he received, who anchored a community, who deserved better than he got. When you remember Rachel Holloway, you honor a woman whose faith and kindness defined her life, who died protecting her child, who left behind a legacy of compassion. When you remember Nathan Cole, you acknowledge a farmer who worked hard, loved his children, and was betrayed by the person who should have been his partner. When you remember Lucas Reed and Talia Moore, you recognize the humanity of people who struggled, who needed help, who were murdered by those they tried to assist. And when you remember Lena Morales, you celebrate a young woman full of promise and potential, whose life was stolen by someone she thought was a friend. These people mattered. Their lives had value, and their deaths, tragic as they were, can still serve a purpose if we allow them to teach us, to change us, to make us more vigilant and more compassionate. That is the power of stories, even dark ones. They connect us across time and space, allow us to learn from experiences we have not lived, to avoid mistakes made by others. They make us wiser, more careful, more human. The perpetrators in these stories made choices that destroyed lives, including their own. Elena Mercer will spend the rest of her life in prison, replaying the decision to kill her husband, living with the knowledge of what she threw away. Mara Cole will never see her children grow up, will never have a chance to explain or apologize or make amends. Marcus Wade, Connor, Blake, Mark Alvarez, they are all incarcerated, their futures reduced to concrete walls and barred windows, their potential squandered by choices made in moments of rage or desperation or drug-induced delusion. It is tempting to see these people as monsters, as fundamentally different from us. But they are not. They are people who made terrible choices, who allowed their worst impulses to override their better judgment, who prioritized short-term desires over long-term consequences. They are cautionary tales, examples of what happens when addiction goes untreated, when communication breaks down, when entitlement is allowed to fester, when mental illness is ignored. Understanding this does not mean forgiving them. It does not mean excusing their crimes or minimizing the suffering they caused. It means recognizing that these tragedies were, in many cases, preventable. If Elena Mercer had received adequate treatment for her addiction, if Mara Cole had felt able to leave her marriage honestly, if Connor and Blake had access to mental health care, if Mark Alvarez had been taught to handle rejection gracefully, these murders might not have happened. The victims might still be alive. The perpetrators might be living productive, meaningful lives instead of wasting away in prison cells. This is why prevention matters. This is why we need to invest in addiction treatment, mental health services, education about healthy relationships. This is why we need to create cultures where people feel safe asking for help, where struggling is not seen as weakness, where intervention is prioritized over punishment. These are not soft approaches. They are smart approaches, proven to reduce violence, to save lives, to create safer communities. But prevention is not just the responsibility of governments and institutions. It is also the responsibility of individuals, of families, of communities. It requires us to pay attention to the people around us, to notice when someone is struggling, to offer help even when it is not requested. It requires us to have difficult conversations, to set boundaries, to say no when something does not feel right. It requires us to model healthy behavior, to call out concerning actions, to create environments where violence is not tolerated. These are not easy things. They require courage, vulnerability, a willingness to be uncomfortable. But they are necessary, because the alternative, as these stories make brutally clear, is unacceptable. The alternative is more dead bodies, more grieving families, more communities shattered by preventable tragedies. And we can do better. We must do better. Now, as the night deepens and sleep approaches, take a moment to breathe. You have absorbed a lot tonight, walked through darkness that most people prefer to ignore. You have confronted uncomfortable truths about human nature, about the fragility of safety, about the people we trust. This is heavy work, important work, and it takes a toll. So give yourself permission to feel whatever you are feeling. Sadness, anger, fear, hope, all of it is valid. All of it is part of processing these stories and integrating the lessons they contain. And when you are ready, let them go. Not completely, not so that you forget what you have learned, but enough that they do not keep you awake, that they do not haunt you, that they do not overshadow the good in your life and in the world. These stories are tools, not burdens. Use them to make better choices, to protect yourself and others, to contribute to a safer world. But do not let them consume you. Do not let them turn you into someone who is afraid to live, to love, to trust. Because for all the darkness in these stories, for all the violence and betrayal and loss, the world is still full of light. It is full of people like Daniel Mercer, who give generously even when they have little. It is full of people like Rachel Holloway, whose faith and kindness define how they move through the world. It is full of people like Talia Moore and Lena Morales, who help others even at great personal risk. These people exist everywhere, in every community, in every country, quietly making the world better through acts of compassion and courage. They outnumber the killers. They outnumber the betrayers. They outnumber the people who choose violence over peace, greed over generosity, hatred over love. The good people are the majority, and they always have been. The problem is that they are quiet, invisible, unnoticed except by the people whose lives they touch. They do not make headlines. They do not inspire true crime documentaries. They simply exist, doing good work, being decent humans, creating the kind of world we all want to live in. So yes, remember these stories. Let them inform how you navigate the world. But also remember the countless stories of goodness that surround you every day. Remember the neighbor who shovels your driveway without being asked. Remember the stranger who returns your lost wallet. Remember the friend who shows up when you are struggling, who listens without judgment, who reminds you that you are not alone. These are the stories that define humanity far more than the murders and betrayals, even if they are less dramatic, less shocking, less likely to be told. Balance the darkness with the light. Acknowledge the evil without being consumed by it. Protect yourself without losing your capacity for trust and connection. This is the challenge, and it is one you are capable of meeting. You are stronger than you know, wiser than you realize, more resilient than you give yourself credit for. And you have the power to make a difference, to be a force for good in a world that desperately needs it. As you close your eyes tonight, picture the people in these stories not as statistics or cautionary tales, but as individuals. Picture Daniel Mercer behind the bar, laughing with customers, handing out kindness like it cost nothing. Picture Rachel Holloway playing with her son, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, full of hope for the future. Picture Nathan Cole walking his fields at sunrise, proud of the land he worked, the life he built. Picture Talia Moore pulling over to help strangers, making a choice that reflected who she was at her core. Picture Lena Morales driving friends home, making sure everyone was safe, being the person she had always been. These were real people, with dreams and fears and loves and losses. They laughed and cried and worried about ordinary things. They were not perfect, but they were human, deserving of life and safety and the chance to grow old. They did not get that chance, but you do. And part of honoring them is living well, living fully, living in a way that acknowledges both the dangers and the beauties of existence. So rest now. Let the weight of these stories settle. Let their lessons integrate into your understanding of the world, and then let sleep come. You have done hard work tonight, emotional work, the kind that leaves you tired in ways that have nothing to do with physical exhaustion. You have looked at darkness and not turned away. You have absorbed difficult truths and allowed them to change you. That takes courage, and you should be proud of it. Tomorrow, when you wake, the world will look a little different. You will notice things you did not notice before, patterns you overlooked, warning signs you dismissed. This is good. This is the point. These stories have given you a gift, the gift of awareness. And that awareness can save your life or someone else's. Use it wisely, not to live in fear but to live with eyes open, to navigate the world with both caution and compassion. And remember, you are not alone in this. There are millions of people who have heard similar stories, who carry similar awareness, who are working every day to create safer communities and prevent violence. You are part of that effort now, whether you realize it or not. Every time you pay attention to a warning sign, every time you intervene when someone needs help, every time you refuse to dismiss concerning behavior, you are contributing to a safer world. You are honoring the victims of these crimes by working to ensure that others do not suffer the same fate. This is meaningful work. It may not always feel that way. The interventions you make might seem small, insignificant, unlikely to change anything. But small actions compound over time. A conversation that seems minor might be the turning point that prevents a tragedy. A phone call to a hotline might save a life. An offer of help might be the first step in someone's recovery from addiction or escape from an abusive relationship. You cannot always see the impact of your actions, but that does not mean they do not matter. They do. They always do. So carry these stories with you, not as nightmares, but as knowledge. Let them inform your choices without paralyzing you with fear. Let them make you wiser without making you cynical. Let them inspire you to act, to care, to pay attention. And let them remind you, always, that life is precious, that time is finite, that the people we love deserve to be cherished while we have them. The victims in these stories ran out of time. Their futures were stolen by people who saw them as obstacles or opportunities or threats. But you still have time. You still have the chance to tell the people you love how much they mean to you, to repair damaged relationships, to seek help if you need it, to offer help to others. Do not waste that chance. Do not assume there will always be another opportunity, another conversation, another day. Live now. Love now. Act now. And if you are in a situation that feels dangerous, if you are being hurt or threatened, if you know someone who is struggling, do not wait. Reach out. Tell someone. Call the police, a hotline, a trusted friend or family member. You do not have to face it alone, and you should not. There are people and organizations whose entire purpose is to help people in crisis. They are there for you. Use them. Similarly, if you see someone else in danger, if you notice warning signs in a friend or colleague or neighbor, speak up. Say something. It might feel awkward. It might damage the relationship. But it might also save a life, and that is worth any temporary discomfort. Too many people stay silent because they do not want to intrude, do not want to make assumptions, do not want to be wrong. But the cost of being wrong is minimal compared to the cost of being right and doing nothing. Rachel Holloway's neighbors heard nothing suspicious the morning she was murdered. They went about their days, unaware that a woman was being assaulted and killed just houses away from them. Could they have done anything if they had known? Probably not. The attack happened too quickly, too violently, for intervention to have been possible. But in other cases, neighbors have heard screams and ignored them, have seen concerning behavior and dismissed it, have had opportunities to intervene and chose not to. Do not be one of those people. If something feels wrong, investigate. If someone seems to be in danger, act. Better to be wrong and embarrassed than right and silent. These are the practical lessons of these stories, the actionable takeaways that can translate into real-world change. But there is also a deeper lesson, one that is harder to articulate, but no less important. It is a lesson about the nature of evil, about how it exists not in monsters hiding in shadows, but in ordinary people making terrible choices. It is a lesson about the fragility of civilization, about how thin the veneer of normalcy really is, about how quickly a life can descend into chaos when the right pressures are applied. This is uncomfortable to acknowledge. We want to believe that we are fundamentally different from people who commit murder, that we could never make the choices they made, that we are protected by our inherent goodness or moral clarity. But the truth is more complicated. Most of the perpetrators in these stories were not evil from birth. They were people who faced challenges, addiction, mental illness, toxic relationships, poverty, trauma, and made choices in response to those challenges that led them down dark paths. This does not excuse them. They still chose violence. They still destroyed lives. They still deserve to be held accountable. But it does mean that any of us, under the right circumstances, could potentially make similar choices. We are all capable of violence, of betrayal, of prioritizing our needs over the well-being of others. What separates most of us from the people in these stories is not some fundamental moral superiority, but a combination of better circumstances, better support systems, better coping mechanisms, and perhaps a degree of luck. Recognizing this is humbling. It strips away the comfortable illusion that we are immune to becoming perpetrators, that our goodness is guaranteed. But it also creates space for empathy, for understanding that prevention requires addressing root causes, not just punishing symptoms. If we want to reduce violence, we need to create societies where people have access to mental health care, where addiction is treated as a medical issue rather than a moral failing, where domestic violence is taken seriously, where young people are taught healthy relationship skills. This is a long-term project, one that requires sustained effort and significant investment. But it is the only approach that actually works. Harsh punishments deter some people, but they do not address the underlying conditions that lead to violence. Locking people up after they commit crimes protects society from that individual, but it does not prevent the next person from making similar choices. Real prevention requires changing the systems and cultures that produce violent people. And that work, difficult as it is worth doing. Because every life saved, every tragedy prevented, every family that does not have to experience the kind of loss described in these stories is a victory. It may not make headlines. It may not be dramatic or visible, but it is meaningful in the most profound way possible. So as you prepare to sleep, think about what role you can play in this work. Maybe it is as simple as being kinder to the people around you, checking in on friends who seem withdrawn, modeling healthy behavior for your children. Maybe it is more involved, volunteering with organizations that support victims of violence, advocating for policy changes, contributing financially to mental health programs. Or maybe it is something in between, using your platform or skills or connections to raise awareness, to start conversations, to challenge harmful norms. Whatever it is, it matters. You matter. Your choices ripple outward in ways you cannot always see, affecting people you may never meet, creating change that might not be visible for years or even generations. But that does not make it less real or less important. Every act of kindness, every intervention, every refusal to look away from injustice contributes to a better world. And in a world that often feels overwhelming and broken, that is reason for hope. These 5 stories have taken you on a journey through the darkest parts of human experience. You have witnessed betrayal, violence, loss that cannot be repaired. You have seen how quickly trust can be weaponized, how easily normal people can become killers, how fragile the line is between safety and tragedy. These are hard truths, painful truths, truths that would be easier to ignore. But you did not ignore them. You listened. You engaged. You allowed these stories to affect you, to change you, to teach you. That takes courage, and it deserves to be acknowledged. So acknowledge it. Give yourself credit for doing the hard work of facing darkness, of learning difficult lessons, of becoming more aware and more prepared. And now, let yourself rest. You have earned it. These stories will still be here tomorrow, still be part of your understanding of the world. But right now, in this moment, you need sleep. You need to let your mind process what it has absorbed, to integrate these lessons at a deeper level, to recover from the emotional weight of bearing witness to such profound suffering. So close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Let the tension drain from your body. You are safe. You are prepared. You are more aware than you were a few hours ago, and that awareness is armor, protection against the kinds of tragedies described tonight. You cannot prevent every bad thing from happening, but you can make yourself and the people you love a little bit safer. And that has to be enough. As you drift towards sleep, let your thoughts turn to the light, to the good people and good moments that outnumber the darkness. Think about people who have been kind to you, who have supported you, who have made your life better simply by being in it. Think about moments of joy, of connection, of love. Think about the future, about the possibilities that still exist, about the potential for growth and healing and change. The world is a complicated place, full of beauty and horror existing side by side. These stories have shown you the horror, but the beauty is still there, still real, still worth celebrating. And you, by engaging with these difficult stories, by refusing to look away from darkness, have earned the right to appreciate that beauty more fully, more deeply, without the naivete that makes people vulnerable. You are wiser now, more aware, better equipped to navigate a world where danger exists, but so does goodness. You know to watch for warning signs, to trust your instincts, to intervene when necessary. You know that addiction destroys, that communication saves relationships, that entitlement can be deadly, that technology leaves evidence, that communities matter. These are valuable lessons, purchased at a terrible price by people who did not deserve to pay it. Honor them by remembering what they taught you. And remember, too, that most stories do not end in tragedy. Most people live full lives and die peacefully in old age, surrounded by people they love. Most marriages do not end in murder. Most acts of kindness are not met with violence. Most trust is not betrayed. The stories you heard tonight are exceptional precisely because they are rare, because they deviate so dramatically from normal human experience. They are warnings, not prophecies. They show what can happen, not what usually happens. So live your life. Love the people worth loving. Trust the people who have earned it. Help others when you can. Build communities that support and protect their members. Teach the next generation to be better, kinder, more aware. And when you encounter darkness, when you see warning signs or concerning behavior, act. Do not wait. Do not hope it will resolve itself. Do not convince yourself that you are overreacting. Trust your instincts, take precautions, and get help if you need it. These are the lessons of tonight's stories. Simple in theory, sometimes difficult in practice, but essential for navigating a world where violence exists alongside beauty, where danger lurks in familiar faces, where the cost of ignoring warning signs can be measured in lives lost and families destroyed. You know better now. You are prepared. And that preparation is the greatest gift these tragic stories can offer. Sleep well, rest deeply, and when you wake, carry these lessons forward, not as burdens, but as tools, not as reasons to fear, but as reasons to pay attention, to care, to act. The victims in these stories cannot benefit from what you have learned, but the living can. The people whose tragedies might be prevented because you noticed something, said something, did something. They are the reason these stories matter. They are why bearing witness to darkness is not just morbid fascination, but a form of civic duty, of moral responsibility, of love for humanity in all its complicated, beautiful, terrible reality. You have done that duty tonight. You have borne witness. You have learned. You have changed. And now you can rest, knowing that you are a little bit safer, a little bit wiser, a little bit more capable of protecting yourself and others. That is worth something. That is worth everything. So let go. Let sleep come. Let these stories settle into the background of your consciousness, there when you need them, but not consuming your present moment. The darkness will still be there tomorrow, but so will the light. And you, armed with knowledge and awareness, are better equipped to navigate between them, to find the path that keeps you safe, while still allowing you to live fully, to love deeply, to contribute meaningfully to the world. That is the goal. That is the hope. That is the promise these difficult stories make if you are willing to learn from them. Rest now. You have earned it. And when you wake, the world will be waiting, complex and dangerous and beautiful and full of possibility. You will be ready for it in ways you were not before tonight. And that readiness, that awareness, that willingness to look at hard truths and integrate difficult lessons is the difference between being a passive victim of circumstance and an active participant in your own safety and the safety of others. So thank you for listening. Thank you for not looking away. Thank you for allowing these stories to affect you, to teach you, to change you. The victims whose stories you heard tonight would want that. They would want their suffering to serve some purpose, to prevent others from experiencing the same fate. And by learning from their stories, by taking the lessons seriously, by committing to pay attention and act when necessary, you honor their memories in the most meaningful way possible. Sleep well, dream peacefully, and wake ready to be the kind of person who makes the world a little bit safer, a little bit kinder, a little bit better. Because that is what these stories, as dark as they are, ultimately ask of us. Not to live in fear, but to live with awareness. Not to trust no one, but to trust wisely. Not to withdraw from the world, but to engage with it more thoughtfully, more carefully, more compassionately. You can do this. You are doing this. And the fact that you listened tonight, that you engaged with difficult material when it would have been easier to turn away, proves that you have the courage and the commitment necessary to make a difference. So carry that forward. Let it inform your choices. Let it guide your actions. Let it make you a force for good in a world that desperately needs more people willing to pay attention, to care, to act. That is your challenge. That is your opportunity. That is the gift these tragic stories offer if you are willing to accept it. And based on your willingness to listen tonight, to engage with darkness, to learn difficult lessons, it is clear that you are exactly the kind of person who can and will make a difference. So rest now, knowing that you are part of the solution, part of the movement toward a safer, kinder world. And when you wake, continue that work in whatever way makes sense for your life, your circumstances, your unique gifts and opportunities. The victims in these stories deserved better. They deserved lives unmarked by violence, futures full of possibility, deaths that came peacefully after long, fulfilling lives. They did not get that. But you can honor them by working to ensure that others do, that future generations benefit from the lessons purchased at such a terrible price. That is meaningful work. That is sacred work. And you are capable of it. So one more time, rest. Let sleep come. Let your body and mind recover from the emotional labor of tonight. You have walked through darkness and emerged on the other side, wiser and more aware. That is an accomplishment, one that required courage and commitment. Acknowledge it. Be proud of it. And then let it go, trusting that the lessons have integrated, that they will be there when you need them, but do not need to occupy your conscious mind in this moment. The world turns. The night deepens. And you, having done the hard work of bearing witness to tragedy, have earned the right to peaceful sleep. So take it. Accept it. Let the darkness of these stories fade into the darkness of sleep, and trust that when morning comes, you will be ready to face the world with new eyes, new understanding, new commitment to living wisely and well. That is the promise of difficult stories. They change us. They prepare us. They make us better equipped to navigate a complex world. And you, by engaging fully with tonight's stories, have accepted that promise, have allowed yourself to be changed in ways that will make you safer and more capable of protecting others. That is no small thing. That is, in fact, one of the most important things a person can do. So rest now in the knowledge that you have done something important tonight. You have learned. You have grown. You have become more aware. And that awareness, that knowledge, that growth will serve you and the people around you for the rest of your life. It is a gift, hard one, but valuable, and you should treasure it even as you let yourself rest from the effort of acquiring it. Sleep well. Dream of light, not darkness. And wake ready to be the kind of person who pays attention, who acts when necessary, who refuses to let preventable tragedies unfold when intervention is possible. The world needs more people like that. And tonight, by listening, by learning, by engaging with difficult truths, you have proven that you are one of them. So carry that identity forward with pride, with purpose, with commitment to making the world a little bit safer for everyone. These 5 stories, as dark as they are, have served their purpose. They have warned you, taught you, prepared you. Now let them recede into the background, their lessons integrated, their warnings heeded, their victims honored by your commitment to learn from their suffering. That is all they can ask. That is all anyone can ask. And you have delivered. So rest. You have earned it. And when you wake, the world will be waiting, full of challenges and opportunities, dangers and beauties, complexity and clarity. You will be ready for it. You will be prepared. And that preparation, that readiness, is the final gift these tragic stories offer. Accept it, use it, and live well, knowing that you have done the hard work of facing darkness and emerged stronger, wiser, more capable of navigating the complicated reality we all share. Good night. Sleep peacefully, and wake ready to honor the victims of these stories by living well, loving deeply, and paying attention to the warning signs that might prevent the next tragedy. That is your task. That is your opportunity. And based on everything you have demonstrated tonight, it is clear that you are more than capable of rising to the challenge. As the final moments of this long journey approach, let there be a moment of silence. Not the silence of forgetting, but the silence of remembering. A moment to hold in your heart the names and faces of people you never knew, but whose stories have become part of your understanding of the world. Daniel Mercer, Rachel Holloway, Nathan Cole, Lucas Reed, Talia Moore, Lena Morales. Say their names, even if only in your mind. Acknowledge that they lived, that they mattered, that their deaths were not inevitable, but the result of choices made by other people. And acknowledge, too, the families left behind. Caleb Holloway raising his son alone. Nathan Cole's children growing up without either parent. Lena Morales' parents establishing scholarships in her name. These people carry grief that will never fully heal, wounds that will never completely close. But they continue. They find ways to transform their pain into purpose, their loss into legacy. They are remarkable, even if they would reject that description. They are simply doing what must be done, surviving when survival seems impossible, creating meaning when everything feels meaningless. Think about what it takes to forgive the person who murdered your wife. To stand in a courtroom and say that you want mercy, not vengeance, even though every fiber of your being screams for justice. Caleb Holloway did that. He chose to honor Rachel's values even when it went against his own pain, his own anger, his own very human desire to see her killer suffer. That is a level of grace most people cannot imagine, let alone achieve. And whether you agree with his choice or not, whether you think forgiveness was appropriate or naive, you have to acknowledge the strength it took. Think about what it takes to lose a child to violence, and then decide to speak publicly about it, to share your story in the hope that it might prevent another family from experiencing the same loss. Lena Morales' parents did that. They turned their private grief into public advocacy, visiting schools, talking to teenagers about consent and rejection and the consequences of violence. They relive their daughter's death every time they tell her story, but they do it anyway because they believe it matters, because they hope it might save someone else's daughter. Think about what it takes to be Nathan Cole's children, to know that your mother killed your father, to live with the complexity of loving someone who committed an unforgivable act. These children did not choose any of this. They were simply living their lives, going to school, playing with friends, believing their family was normal. And then everything shattered, and they had to rebuild their understanding of who their parents were, who they themselves were, what family even meant. They are survivors of a different kind, carrying trauma that will shape them for the rest of their lives. These are the real costs of violence. Not just the lives lost, but the lives forever altered by loss. The children who grow up too fast. The spouses who sleep alone in beds that used to hold two people. The parents who bury children, an order of events that violates the natural progression of life. The siblings who lose brothers and sisters. The friends who lose confidence. The communities that lose anchors. The ripples extend outward endlessly, touching people who never knew the victims but feel the absence of their presence in the world. And for what? Elena Mercer killed her husband for insurance money she will never get to spend. Mara Cole murdered Nathan to be with a man she will never touch again. Marcus Wade assaulted and killed a pregnant woman and gained nothing but a life sentence. Connor and Blake murdered two people who could have been their salvation and destroyed their own futures in the process. Mark Alvarez killed a young woman because she said no and now has nothing but regrets and concrete walls. What did any of them gain? What was worth the cost they paid and the infinitely greater cost their victims paid? Nothing. The answer is nothing. The things they thought they wanted, money, freedom, revenge, satisfaction, they did not get any of it. They traded everything for nothing, destroyed lives for reasons that make no sense when examined in the light. And that is perhaps the most frustrating part of these stories. The senselessness of it all. The waste. The terrible mathematics where people add up their circumstances and arrive at murder as the solution, only to discover too late that it solved nothing and destroyed everything. But this senselessness, this waste, this terrible miscalculation, it contains a lesson. It shows that violence is almost never the answer people think it is. It does not solve problems. It creates new, worse problems. It does not free people. It traps them. It does not satisfy. It leaves them empty. And understanding this, really internalizing it, is crucial for prevention. Because if we can help people see that violence will not give them what they want, that it will only make everything worse, maybe we can stop some of them before they cross that line. This is where education matters. Where conversations with young people about consequences matter. Where modeling healthy conflict resolution matters. Where showing people that there are other options, other paths, other ways to handle pain and anger and desperation, that matters. It is not enough to tell people not to commit violence. We have to show them why, have to help them understand that whatever they think they will gain, they are wrong, that the cost is always higher than they imagine, that there is no coming back from certain choices. And we have to provide alternatives. Addiction treatment for people like Elena Mercer. Couples counseling and divorce resources for people like Mara Cole. Mental health services for people like Connor and Blake. Education about healthy relationships for people like Mark Alvarez. These are not luxuries. They are necessities, infrastructure as important as roads and bridges, investments that pay dividends in lives saved and tragedies prevented. But they require commitment, funding, cultural change. They require us to prioritize prevention over punishment, to value human potential over retribution. This is hard. It goes against instincts that demand justice, that want to see bad people suffer, that find satisfaction in harsh sentences and public condemnation. But those instincts, while understandable, do not actually make us safer. They make us feel better temporarily, give us the illusion of control, let us believe that we have separated the good people from the bad people and can now relax. But the reality is more complicated. Today's murderer was yesterday's struggling person who did not get help. Tomorrow's victim might be saved if we intervene in someone's life today. So the choice is ours. We can continue to respond to violence after it happens, locking people up and mourning the dead and expressing shock that such things occur in our communities. Or we can start preventing violence before it happens, investing in the systems and services and cultural changes that address root causes, that catch people before they fall, that create conditions where violence becomes less likely. The first approach is easier, more emotionally satisfying, more aligned with our desire for simple answers. But the second approach is the one that actually works. And it starts with stories like these. With bearing witness to what happens when prevention fails, when warning signs are ignored, when people slip through the cracks. These stories are painful, yes, but they are also instructive. They show patterns. They illuminate risk factors. They demonstrate consequences. And by studying them, by really engaging with them, we become better equipped to recognize similar situations in our own lives and intervene before they escalate. That is what you have done tonight. You have studied these patterns. You have learned to recognize warning signs. You have seen the consequences of inaction, of dismissing concerns, of hoping problems will resolve themselves. And now you carry that knowledge, that awareness, that understanding. It is uncomfortable knowledge. It would be easier not to have it, to remain ignorant of how quickly normal lives can descend into tragedy. But ignorance is not safety. It is just ignorance. And you are safer now, more prepared, more capable of protecting yourself and others. So as this long night draws to a close, as sleep finally claims you, let there be gratitude. Gratitude that you are alive, safe, able to learn from others' tragedies rather than experiencing your own. Gratitude for the people in your life who love you, who support you, who make your world better. Gratitude for the opportunity to change, to grow, to become more aware and more compassionate. And gratitude, strange as it may seem, for these difficult stories, for the victims who did not choose to teach, but whose lives and deaths contain lessons nonetheless. Their stories have served a purpose tonight. They have educated, warned, prepared. They have honored the dead by ensuring their suffering was not entirely meaningless, that something positive, however small, could emerge from darkness. And you, by listening, by engaging, by allowing yourself to be changed, have been the vessel for that purpose. You have given these victims a voice they no longer possess. You have ensured their deaths were not forgotten, that their stories continue to matter, to make a difference, to potentially save others. That is no small thing. In fact, it might be the most important thing. Because stories are how we learn, how we connect across time and space, how we pass wisdom from one generation to the next. And these stories, as dark as they are, contain wisdom purchased at a terrible price. The wisdom to pay attention, to trust instincts, to intervene when necessary. The wisdom to take addiction seriously, to communicate honestly, to teach children about healthy relationships. The wisdom to recognize that safety is not guaranteed, that trust must be earned, that the people we think we know can surprise us in terrible ways. This is hard-won wisdom, paid for in blood and grief, and it deserves to be honored by being used, by informing how we live and love and protect. So use it. Let it change how you move through the world. Let it make you more observant, more willing to ask difficult questions, more ready to act when something feels wrong. Let it inform how you teach your children, how you support your friends, how you contribute to your community. Let it make you part of the solution, part of the vast network of people working to create a world where tragedies like these become rarer, where people in crisis get help before they harm themselves or others, where violence is prevented rather than merely punished. This is the final lesson of these stories, that we are not powerless, that our choices matter, that paying attention, caring, acting, these simple things can save lives. Daniel Mercer might still be alive if someone had insisted Elena get treatment for her addiction. Rachel Holloway might have survived if mental health resources had been available to the men who killed her. Nathan Cole might still be farming his land if Mara had felt able to leave her marriage honestly. Lucas Reed and Talia Moore might have lived if Connor and Blake had received the help they desperately needed. Lena Morales might be in college now if someone had taught Mark Alvarez that rejection is not an insult and violence is never acceptable. These are painful what-ifs, might-have-beens that haunt the families left behind. But they are also roadmaps for prevention, signs pointing toward the interventions that could save the next potential victim. And you, armed with the knowledge these stories provide, are better equipped to follow those signs, to make those interventions, to be the person who stops a tragedy before it unfolds. That is your power. That is your responsibility. That is the gift and the burden these stories place upon you. And you are capable of carrying it. Tonight has proven that. You had the courage to listen, to engage, to allow difficult truths to penetrate your consciousness. That courage will serve you well as you move forward, as you encounter situations that require action, as you navigate the complicated terrain between trust and caution, between helping and protecting yourself. And now, finally, it is time to rest. You have journeyed through 5 murders, 5 betrayals, 5 stories of ordinary people making terrible choices with devastating consequences. You have met victims who deserved better and perpetrators who threw away everything. You have learned lessons purchased at a price too high to calculate. And you have emerged changed, wiser, more aware, better equipped to live safely in a world that is both beautiful and dangerous. So close your eyes now. Let your breathing slow. Let the tension drain from your body. You are safe. You are prepared. You carry knowledge that can protect you and others. You are part of the solution, part of the movement toward a safer, kinder world. And that is something to take pride in, something to hold on to as you drift toward sleep. Dream of light, not darkness. Dream of the good people who outnumber the bad, the kind acts that outnumber the cruel ones, the lives saved by intervention and compassion and courage. Dream of a future where stories like tonight's become historical curiosities, where prevention works so well that tragedies become rare. Dream of communities that support their members, of systems that catch people before they fall, of cultures that value life and safety and human potential. And when you wake, carry these dreams forward. Make them reality in whatever small ways you can. Pay attention. Ask questions. Intervene when necessary. Support the people and organizations doing this work. Teach the next generation to be better. Create the world you want to live in, one choice at a time, one interaction at a time, one moment of awareness at a time. The victims in these stories cannot be brought back. Their families will grieve forever. The communities they lived in will carry scars that never fully heal. But their stories can still serve a purpose. They can educate, warn, prepare. They can motivate people to act, to care, to pay attention. They can inspire change at individual and societal levels. They can honor the dead by protecting the living. And you, by listening tonight, have made that possible. You have given these stories power, relevance, meaning. You have ensured that Daniel Mercer, Rachel Holloway, Nathan Cole, Lucas Reed, Talia Moore, and Lena Morales did not die entirely in vain, that their suffering produced something positive, however small. That is a gift you have given them, and it is one they would appreciate if they could. So rest now, knowing you have done something important. You have borne witness. You have learned. You have changed. And tomorrow, you will wake ready to be the kind of person who makes the world safer, who prevents tragedies when possible, who honors the dead by protecting the living. That is all anyone can ask. That is everything. Good night. Sleep deeply, and wake ready to live with awareness, to love with wisdom, to act with courage. The world needs people like that. And tonight, you have proven that you are one of them. Before I leave you to your rest, remember this. These stories, as dark as they are, represent only a tiny fraction of human experience. For every murder, there are millions of acts of kindness. For every betrayal, there are countless demonstrations of loyalty. For every moment of violence, there are hours of peace. The darkness exists, yes, but it exists within an ocean of light. Do not let these stories convince you that the world is a terrible place. It is not. It is a complicated place, where terrible things sometimes happen, but where wonderful things happen far more often. So live fully, love deeply, trust wisely, help generously, and when you encounter darkness, face it with the knowledge and awareness these stories have provided. You are prepared. You are capable. You are part of the solution. And that is reason for hope, for pride, for confidence in your ability to navigate whatever challenges life presents. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to engage with difficult material. Thank you for honoring these victims by learning from their stories. And thank you for being the kind of person who seeks knowledge, who faces hard truths, who commits to making the world better in whatever ways you can. Now rest. You have earned it. You have done important work tonight. And tomorrow, when you wake, you will carry that work forward, making the world a little bit safer, a little bit kinder, a little bit better. That is your legacy from this night. That is the gift these tragic stories offer. And based on everything you have demonstrated by listening, it is clear that you will use that gift wisely, compassionately, courageously. Sleep well, dream peacefully, and wake ready to be a force for good in a world that desperately needs more people willing to pay attention, to care, to act. You are one of those people. You have proven it tonight. And tomorrow, you will prove it again. If you found value in these stories, if they changed how you see the world, if they equipped you to protect yourself and others, then please share that gift. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment sharing where you are from and what time you are watching. Because these stories need to be told, these lessons need to be learned, and the more people who engage with this difficult material, the safer we all become. Your engagement helps spread awareness, helps ensure these victims' stories reach people who need to hear them, helps create the kind of world where tragedies become rarer. So one final time, rest now. You have done everything asked of you and more. You have listened, learned, changed. You carry knowledge that can save lives. You are prepared for a world that is both beautiful and dangerous. And you are capable of making a difference, of honoring these victims by preventing future tragedies, of being the kind of person who pays attention and acts when necessary. That is enough. That is everything. Sleep well, and wake ready to use what you have learned to make the world a little bit better, a little bit safer, a little bit more compassionate. The victims would want that. The families would appreciate that. And you, by committing to that work, honor both the dead and the living in the most meaningful way possible. Good night.